Chapter 487. Once the order was given, the sound of the guns being released could be heard. Then, the soldiers who were watching on the sidelines began to aim according to the 3 points in a straight line, each looking for their own target. After all this was done, the Jiaoji army had only moved 10 meters. However, within this 10-meter distance, one could clearly see that their footsteps had begun to increase. Clearly, they were worried that the mercenaries on the city wall would suddenly fire arrows. If their charging speed was fast enough, even though they might not be able to dodge the arrows, at least they would have a higher chance of success. The enemy changed from a slow pace to a fast pace, and then they began to jog. This was clearly a sign that they were about to increase their speed. The eyes of Battalion Commander Chen Bo, who was leading the team, narrowed. He held the Type 95 in his hand and pressed the butt of the gun against his shoulder. Using this as a support, he assumed a very standard and beautiful standing posture while firing the gun. Not only Chen Bo, but all the gunmen were ready to shoot. Now, they only needed to wait for the order to shoot the enemy and make a contribution. Finally, while jogging, the 3,000 Jiaoji soldiers at the front, who were the shield soldiers, had reached the 100-meter mark. The archers behind them also took out their feathered bows and arrows from the quivers on their waists, ready to draw their bows and shoot. Fire! Chen Bo's voice suddenly rang out. Following this voice, the Type 95 in his hand fired the first shot. The target was a person who looked like a small general in the Jiaoji army. Bang! Bang, 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 bang. After the sound of a gunshot, what followed was the scene of thousands of guns being fired. Bursts of popping sounds rang out, and the Jiaoji soldiers fell to the ground one after another. There was no sound of arrows piercing through the air, nor was there a dense cloud of arrows covering the sky. There was only the sound of gunshots and the appearance of the bullets shooting out in a straight line. This was completely different from normal warfare, and instantly caught the Jiaoji soldiers off guard. The first unlucky ones to be chosen as targets were naturally the 1,000 archers. They were the only ones who could pose a threat to the Lung Feng soldiers on the city gate tower. Naturally, they were the ones who suffered the most. Many archers didn't even have time to hold the arrows in their hands before they fell to the ground. Horrifying bloody holes could be seen in their heads. There were also some archers who had just grabbed their arrows and fell to the ground. Even when they died, their faces were filled with unwillingness. Clearly, they couldn't understand why they had died before they could even release their arrows or see the enemy's arrows flying towards them. 1,000 archers were the first to meet with misfortune. Most of them died before they could even set out. Less than 100 of them released their arrows anxiously. However, due to panic or their limited strength, they did not manage to hit the city gate tower. Or perhaps they had already lost their aim. Even if they managed to hit the city gate tower, they did not manage to hit the designated spot. Cold blade, fire! They had already begun to attack. Just now, the 600 auxiliary soldiers had fired first, causing many enemy casualties and throwing the enemy camp into chaos. Seizing the opportunity, Chen Bo gave another shout, and the 400 soldiers of the Cold Vanguard began to attack from the furthest distance. 600 to 700 meters away, the square formation of the Jiaoji soldiers wielding sabers, spears, swords, and halberds also became the first target. The pitiful Jiaoji soldiers were still too far away and were completely unprepared. Suddenly, another wave of concentrated gunshots rang out. Many soldiers fell to the ground with a look of disbelief. The scene gave everyone a huge fright. The final range of an arrow wasn't 150 meters. At such a distance, only those with extremely strong arms could do it. Archers like this were 1 in 1,000. Most of the time, being able to shoot a distance of 100 meters and hit the target with the bow was already very difficult. In reality, the true killing range of an archer was around 60 meters. At such a distance, as long as one had undergone strict training and possessed a certain level of strength, one would be able to kill the enemy. In other words, the actual killing range of an arrow was only around 60 to 70 meters. However, a new weapon that could kill people from 600 meters away had suddenly appeared. That was equivalent to 10 times their attacking range. It was no wonder that the Jiaoji soldiers were afraid, flustered, and terrified. This type of sudden attack also caused the minds of the Jiaoji soldiers 600 to 700 meters away to become chaotic. Even though they saw their comrades die miserably beside them, there were still very few people who made the preparations to flee. At this moment, they were truly beaten silly. Taking advantage of the moment when the enemy was stunned, the Lung Feng soldiers and auxiliary soldiers on the western wall of Beidai City rained down bullets as though they were free. One after another, the Jiaoji soldiers who were targeted were hit by bullets and fell to the ground. There were too many enemies, too many targets, and too many choices. As a result, many of the soldiers switched from single shots to consecutive shots. The gunshots became even more intense. In just a few breaths, too many corpses had fallen below the city wall. The Jiaoji soldiers who were lucky enough to survive finally regained their senses and started to retreat frantically. However, no matter how fast they ran, within a distance of 600 meters, they would still become living targets. Of the more than 1,000 people who ran back, less than 1/10 of them were lucky enough to survive. After witnessing the power of these advanced firearms, the Jiaoji soldiers had long given up on the idea of attacking the city. They ran as fast as they could. Many of them even threw away their weapons and other unnecessary items on the ground, hoping to move forward with light equipment so that they could run faster. As a result, the 500 shield bearers who were walking at the front were in a difficult position. They were originally charging at the front. With the shields in their hands, normal arrows would not be able to harm them. However, even though the shield seemed to be made of iron, its defensive power was greatly reduced in the face of advanced firearms. There were even situations where the shields were penetrated by bullets. Compared to the penetrative power of the bullets, these Jiaoji shield-bearers who were holding wooden shields could not put up any effective resistance. That's right, they were holding wooden shields. As a Jiaoji that lacked metal and all sorts of resources, the number of soldiers who possessed metal shields was extremely small. Only the elites of the elites could possess such shields. Usually, the shields used in the army were only made of wood. It was sufficient to defend against long-range arrows. However, when faced with the sudden attack of bullets, it was naturally inferior. Wooden shields could not block bullets, and they were charging too close to the front. As a result, the 500 shield-bearers were in an awkward position. Should they run? If they charged too close to the front, they would definitely not be able to escape. Should they charge? With a wooden shield in their left hand and a dagger in their right hand, they were still fine in close combat. However, when faced with a 10-meter-tall city wall, they were powerless. They could neither fight nor flee, especially when some of the 500 shield-bearers wanted to retreat but were killed. On the contrary, none of the 450 shield-bearers who stood still and did not dare to move were hurt. Instead, they chose to stay where they were. If they stayed where they were, they would most likely become captives and lose their freedom. However, compared to retreating and dying, it was still much better. As a result, a somewhat dramatic scene appeared on the battlefield. The 400 shield-bearers seemed to be wandering outside the battlefield. They stood there in an orderly manner, waiting for the judgment of the god of fate. Naturally, Uncle Chen also saw the 500 shield-bearers. However, when he saw that they did not act rashly and instead stood there obediently, he stopped thinking of killing them. Bullets cost money and the materials required were not cheap. If he could save a bullet, it was better to save a bullet. Moreover, the 500 shield-bearers were all able-bodied men. For the sixth young master who placed great emphasis on manpower, this was a considerable gain. Therefore, only a company of auxiliary soldiers were keeping an eye on the shield-bearers. The rest of the soldiers continued to do what they were supposed to do. They continued to fire continuously. However, because the enemies who could escape had already run far away, they had already switched from continuous fire to burst fire. A total of 3,000 people charged forward, but in the end, less than 200 managed to escape. Other than the 400 shield-bearers, the Jiaoji army suffered a tragic loss of 2,000 people in just a short period of time. This result completely frightened the Jiaoji army's general Huang Hua. After this battle, he finally understood why Chui City and Beidai City fell so quickly. Faced with such advanced firearms, he was afraid that no one would be able to stop them. "General, what do we do?" Seeing that the soldiers who charged out were retreating at an even faster speed and less than a tenth of them survived, a Chiliarch could not help but look at Huang Hua with a bitter expression. Frowning deeply, Huang Hua muttered to himself for a moment before making the decision to retreat. They had already lost more than half of their forces and their morale was so unstable. If they continued to charge forward, they would not be able to return. Even if the king wanted to punish them, they could only choose to retreat. The general's decision to retreat made the Chiliarch beside him heave a sigh of relief. Following the order, the 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers who were already afraid of being beaten up frantically retreated at a speed that was more than 2 times faster than when they came. From the looks of it, humans truly cherished their lives. The Jiaoji army retreated. On the city walls, not a single soldier cheered loudly. Perhaps to them, this was something that could not be any more normal. Since that was the case, what was there to be happy about? On the contrary, there were 200 people who were displeased. They were the auxiliary soldiers who were arranged to guard Beidai City. Because of the previous incident where the Jiaoji citizens charged into the city, Chun Bo was worried that there would be a fire behind him. Thus, he arranged for these 200 people to guard the rear. This also meant that they did not have any chance to participate in the battle. It was inevitable that they would feel resentful. Chapter 488. In order to ensure fairness, the 450 Jiaoji shield-bearers who didn't dare to move were handed over to the 200 auxiliary soldiers. No matter what, it could be said that others ate the meat while they ate the soup. Thus, the 200 auxiliary soldiers opened the city gates under the lead of the 2 company commanders and walked out while glaring fiercely. In order to survive, the shield-bearers had thrown all their weapons to the ground. Finally, they saw the mercenaries in green walk out. For some reason, they were not afraid at all. Instead, they felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off their shoulders. If no one came out to receive them, it would be a dead end. Beidai City's defense was a great victory. More than 2,300 enemies were killed, nearly 500 were captured, and countless military supplies were obtained. When Yang Chendong rushed to Beidai City with the main force of more than 7,000 people, he heard such a report. On the other hand, in Hanoi, the capital of Jiaoji, bad news came one after another. As the king, Lu Li seemed to have aged a lot in an instant. There were even some voices questioning him, saying that he was going to let the young crown prince take over the throne in advance. When King Li heard these discussions, he only replied that he understood in a daze. Then, he turned around and entered the royal palace, not seeing anyone else. The king didn't want to see anyone. This caused the officials to panic. Many of them went to Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing to ask for advice. Compared to the other officials who were panicking, Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing was much calmer. Everyone, don't worry. The crown prince is about to enter the city. Let's go welcome him together. Although Li had many concubines, he only had 2 sons. One was his eldest son, Li Siki, but he died early. The other was the crown prince's second son, Li Yuanlong. All this time, in order to not have any conflicts with the royal family, Li Yuanlong chose to go to Juzhen Prefecture in the south of Jiaoji. Since he was his father's only son, he wouldn't pass the throne to anyone else. Thus, the crown prince left the capital. Needless to say, this Li Yuanlong was quite capable. According to history, he had indeed inherited Li Li's legacy. During his reign as the king, the strength of Jiaoji had risen significantly. Geniuses would always show themselves wherever they went. For example, in Juzhen County, he relied on the geographical environment near the sea to make Juzhen County very prosperous. Of course, it was also because it was close to the sea that he had heard about mercenaries. Occasionally, when he sent out ships to trade with other countries, he would see mercenary warships with 5-starred red flags hanging high above. Compared to the ships of other small countries, the warships of the mercenaries were very domineering in terms of size, water consumption, and attack power. Rumor had it that their ships were equipped with heavy cannons that could sink any hostile ships from a long distance away. Slowly, the ships of the mercenaries became the masters of this area. If other ships wanted to pass through here, they had to pay a heavy tax. Li Yuanlong still remembered the first time he saw a mercenary warship with a red flag hanging high above the sea. Naturally, he was filled with envy when he saw the huge ship sailing past. Since then, Li Yuanlong had given strict orders to his subordinates to not make enemies with the mercenaries. On the contrary, they were to pay taxes on time and not play any tricks. It was because of this extremely correct decision that the ships of Jiaoji had been very safe. Because of this, they had made many maritime transactions with other countries and earned a lot of money. It was a pity that maritime transactions prohibited the use of ironware. Otherwise, Jiaoji would have been able to obtain even more ironware and increase the strength of its army. However, he never expected that his father and his country would make enemies with the mercenaries and even lead them to kill their way into the country. When he heard the news, Li Yuanlong rushed over with the 30,000 men of the Crown Prince's personal guards. On the way, he heard the news of the defeat of the army outside Beidu City. Outside the east gate of Hanoi City, Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing led a group of civil and military officials to welcome the Crown Prince, Li Yuanlong. The officials warmly greeted the Crown Prince, the future king. For the sake of their future, it seemed like everyone wanted to curry favor with him. On the surface, Li Yuanlong was chatting and laughing with the officials. However, he quickly called Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing to the side. Prime Minister Yuan, what is going on? Are the mercenaries really that strong on land? Sigh. At the mention of this question, the wise Yuan Chunqing immediately shook his head in pain. Yes, Your Highness. General Huang Hua came back and said that the enemy had a type of gun that could shoot a few hundred feet away. Could take a person's life on the spot. A gun that could shoot a few hundred feet away. Even though Li Yuanlong was somewhat prepared, when he heard this answer, he was still shocked and sighed. Because of Li Yuanlong's strategy, he had always thought that the Jiaoji ships and the mercenary ships on the sea were peaceful. This made him think that the enemy's cannons were limited in power. Therefore, they did not make enemies everywhere and became the true overlord of the sea. However, when he heard that they had such a powerful gun, he understood that it was not that they did not have the power to dominate, but that they were not willing to do so. As for the reason, others might not know, but Yang Qindong understood it best. It was that they did not have enough people and manpower. It was because they did not have enough people. Even if they occupied some places now, they would not be able to control them. Facing the enemy's armed forces, he could lead his army to wipe them out, but he couldn't just kill the foreign civilians. If he wanted to rule the world, killing them wouldn't solve the problem. He needed more Han people. Some glory wasn't just for him to enjoy. He needed more Han people to enjoy it together with him. Li Yuanlong was not Yang Qindong. Of course, he did not understand what the other party was thinking. When he heard that the mercenaries had attacked the country, he thought that his father had done something to offend them. Right, Prime Minister Yuan, where is my father? After getting a rough understanding of the situation, Li Yuanlong asked with concern as he walked towards the palace in the city with the other officials. Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing said with an ugly expression, His Majesty, the king entered the harem alone. He did not allow anyone to disturb him. Anyone? Does that also include this prince? When Li Yuanlong heard this answer, he was first stunned. Then, he thought of something and revealed a look of joy. Yes. The king specifically said that he would not see the crown prince. Yuan Chunqing was much more straightforward when he replied. Since there were some things that could not be avoided, then there was no need to avoid it. Although it was a little bullying, he was the king after all. Furthermore, there was no need to bully a father and son. When he heard this affirmative answer, Li Yuanlong's expression slowly returned to normal. He finally understood that his father had left the mess for him to deal with. If there was a mistake, then it would be his fault. Not only would his father not support him, but he would also criticize him and even take back his authority. On the other hand, if he did it well, then his father would have to abdicate. Li Yuanlong was indeed someone who had been the crown prince for many years. He was able to understand the situation so quickly. This was also why Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing had an ugly expression when he answered this question. However, there was nothing he could do. After all, Li Yuanlong was the king and he was only the king's son. The so-called kinship, Haha, I almost forgot. In the face of huge benefits and reputation, there was no kinship in the royal family. After knowing his father's plan, Li Yuanlong did not have any intention of avoiding it. The fact that he had rushed over from Juzhen County after receiving the imperial edict was enough to explain everything. If he really wanted to avoid it, he could have just said that he was not feeling well and did not appear. Furthermore, as the crown prince and the future king, Li Yuanlong did not want to see anything happen to Jiaoji. However, since there was a problem, it had to be solved. The heavy responsibility of solving this problem fell on his shoulders. This was his responsibility. Since that is the case, I will have to trouble Prime Minister Yuan to gather all the officials. This crown prince would like to hear their opinions. Since the problem was to be solved, it was naturally Han Xian who gathered the soldiers. The more the better. If he listened to their opinions, he might be able to find a way to solve the problem. Although Li Yuanlong already had a way to solve the problem, it would cost him too much to complete it. If there was a better way, he would not mind accepting and listening to it. Yuan Chunqing knew that the crown prince was going to take over the government in advance, or rather, he was taking the initiative to take over the problem. He first looked at Li Yuanlong with an admiring gaze, then nodded and said, "Okay, then I will gather all the officials and listen to the crown prince's instructions." "Thank you, Prime Minister," Li Yuanlong replied in a respectful tone. After the crown prince entered the city, the first thing he did was to gather the important officials in the front hall of the palace to discuss important matters. All the officials of Jiaoji rushed over. None of them wanted to let go of this opportunity to show their faces. As a result, the hall that could normally only hold 50 to 60 officials was stuffed with over 100 people, making it seem very crowded. Li Yuanlong didn't have the slightest intention of chasing them away. On the contrary, he maintained a smile on his face, showing a very patient look. When almost everyone had arrived, at least no one was rushing over from the outside. He coughed lightly and attracted everyone's attention to himself. With this light cough, the hall quieted down. Then, more than 200 eyes stared at Crown Prince Li Yuanlong. They all wanted to hear what this crown prince would say and how he would resolve the predicament in front of them. Chapter 489. Everyone. After the hall fell silent, Li Yuanlong's voice was heard. "I'm sure everyone knows what kind of situation we are facing now. The mercenaries are coming with a vengeance, and they are equipped with advanced firearms that can take people's lives from hundreds of zhang away. Our army is no match for them, and we have already lost several battles. Right now, the enemy has already taken over Beatty City, which is less than 200 li away from our Jiaoji capital. At this time of crisis, I wonder if anyone has any ideas on how to retreat?" After saying this, Li Yuanlong looked at the officials with anticipation. He wanted to see if there were any better ideas. After hearing the crown prince's words, the officials, who were still discussing spiritedly, fell completely silent. In fact, before the crown prince came, everyone had talked about the war in the country more than once. Huang Hua had returned, Jishu and Longbian had also sent back news, confirming that the mercenaries had a powerful killing weapon in their hands that was far beyond their imagination. It was an advanced flintlock that could fire continuously and was extremely accurate. It was said that the firearm could shoot up to 600 to 700 meters away. When it landed on a person, it could still be fatal. In comparison, the bows and arrows in their hands could only shoot up to 100 meters. When it was truly lethal, it could only shoot up to 50 to 60 meters. The difference was more than 10 times. How could they fight this war? But what could they do if they couldn't win? This was where they lived, and the mercenaries belonged to outsiders. Even if they were outsiders, they couldn't just let them do whatever they wanted, right? When the king refused to see anyone, everyone put all their hopes on the crown prince. But now that the crown prince asked this question, how could they answer? Everyone who couldn't think of a solution could only turn their attention to Li Yuanlong. In their opinion, they didn't have the ability to find a solution, but the crown prince must have a solution. No one spoke. Although this was within Li Yuanlong's expectations, he still couldn't help but let out a long sigh when he saw the outcome. Is there really no solution to this? Seeing how disappointed the crown prince was, the officials couldn't help but lower their heads. Obviously, they didn't want the crown prince to see their incompetent side. On the other hand, some of the military officials had a helpless look on their faces, but none of them lowered their heads. As generals, they were originally prepared to sacrifice their lives for the country. They were not afraid of death. After seeing that the civil officials were helpless, the generals led by the famous General Fan Yuhai stepped forward. "Your Highness, we are willing to be the vanguard. Once you give the order, no one will disobey." More than a dozen generals stood up and spoke in unison. It was quite imposing. Their words caused the civil officials who had their heads lowered to tremble. It also caused Li Yuanlong, who was seated at the head of the table, to light up. No matter what, as long as there are generals who dare to fight, Zhaoji will not fall. The most important thing was that with the support of these generals, his position as the temporary commander would be stable. Good. Generals, your courage is commendable. This crown prince is very happy. Li Yuanlong's gaze fell on Fan Yuhai, Huang Hua, and the other generals as he spoke emotionally. After speaking, he shook his head. However, there is a huge disparity in the weapons of both sides. Even if the generals aren't afraid of death, this crown prince doesn't want to throw away his life. Before we can think of a better solution, we have to carefully consider whether to fight or not. Your Highness. When Fan Yuhai heard the meaning behind Li Yuanlong's words, he became anxious. He could sense that the crown prince was going to give up the battle and ask for peace. All right, this crown prince has his own plans. Where is the prime minister? Li Yuanlong interrupted Fan Yuhai's next words and swept his gaze across the officials. This old official is here. Ruan Chuncheng took a step forward. This crown prince orders you to represent this crown prince in negotiating with the mercenaries in Beidao City. See what they want. If they are willing to withdraw their troops, we are willing to compensate them. Are you willing to take up this task? Since he couldn't find a better solution, Li Yuanlong followed his original plan. This was going to ask for peace. Speaking of which, this wasn't a good task. As the prime minister of the country and the leader of the officials, if Ruan Chuncheng said he wasn't willing, no one could force him. However, after his expression changed a few times, he still nodded and agreed. Since it is the crown prince's order, this old official is willing to do it. Good, as expected of the prime minister of the country. Then I will have to trouble you. You can rest assured that the negotiation is just a method. From today onwards, we will use the power of the country to forge iron on a large scale and strive to forge more iron shields and other iron weapons. This will ensure that when the mercenaries are forced to fight, we won't be too passive. In addition, this crown prince will send people to the Great Ming dynasty to present a letter of credence. I am willing to be a subject in exchange for the mercenaries' withdrawal. Your Highness the Crown Prince. Hearing this, all the officials fell to their knees one by one. Of course, they knew that everything they had today was not easy to come by. Now that Li Yuanlong had made so many concessions, they felt very wronged. However, after thinking about it, it seemed that there was no better way to resolve this crisis than this method. Sai, if you want dignity, you need to be strong enough. I hope that after this incident, everyone can work together to make Zhaoji even stronger. This way, no one will look down on us and Zhaoji in the future. Long live your Highness the Crown Prince. Hearing Li Yuanlong's words of instruction, all the officials revealed their determination to strive for greatness. The Crown Prince saw all of this and felt very gratified. If everyone could change after this ordeal, it would be a good thing. Of course, there was one thing that Li Yuanlong would not say out loud. That was, the negotiation was just a pretense. His real goal was to use this opportunity to forge more iron weapons to fight the enemy. Being influenced by what he saw and heard since he was young, he did not believe that begging could be exchanged for peace. Only by becoming stronger would others look up to him. That was where true strength lied. Even if the enemy had such advanced firearms, with Zhaoji's current conditions, it would require too much effort to win the war. If things went wrong, the foundation of Zhaoji would be shaken. This was not something that the ambitious Li Yuanlong wanted to see. What he needed was to win this war with the smallest price. For this reason, He did not hesitate to temporarily lower his head to the great Ming dynasty in order to obtain their support. He had already asked around and found out that the enemy's general was the Duke of Loyalty. Since the Duke was conferred by the great Ming dynasty, this matter would be easy to handle. As long as the great Ming dynasty's emperor ordered him to retreat, how would the enemy dare to not retreat? When that time came, it would be time for him to launch an all-out counterattack. He might even launch a surprise attack while the enemy was retreating. If things went well, he might even be able to obtain those advanced firearms for his own use. As for whether the great Ming dynasty would do as he wished and request Yang Qindong to retreat, there was no need to think too much about this. What was the great Ming dynasty? It was a great nation. The most important thing was what others thought of them. As long as they said something nice, or even made some verbal promises, the great Ming dynasty would definitely do as they said for the sake of their reputation. This was what it meant to suffer because of their reputation. In order to gain a good reputation and a magnanimous title, countless dynasties in history had paid a heavy price for this. Even Li Yuanlong could see this point and use it to his advantage. It was clear that such a huge shortcoming hindered China's development. After the impromptu court meeting ended, Li Yuanlong found Prime Minister Yuan Chuncheng and told him his true purpose. Prime Minister, when you go to the mercenary camp, don't be too anxious. The negotiations can be done slowly. In this case, the people I sent to the great Ming dynasty to ask for peace will cooperate with you to deliver the good news. Rest assured. Considering the distance between Jiaoji and the great Ming dynasty, some things could not be done in a day. How to fight for time was what Yuan Chunqing needed to do. After understanding the crown prince's intention, Yuan Chunqing was very relieved. He was worried that the crown prince would be scared. If that was the case, how could he lead Jiaoji to greater heights? Fortunately, everything was just a temporary measure. A person who could adapt to circumstances like this was the true leader of Jiaoji. With a face full of admiration, Yuan Chunqing confidently patted his chest and promised Li Yuanlong, "Your Highness, please rest assured. Once I'm here, it won't be a problem to delay for 10 to 15 days. Okay, this crown prince will order the people who go to the great Ming dynasty to ask for peace to speed up." Li Yuanlong also vowed. In general, he valued the prime minister's talent very much. Naturally, he did not want anything to happen to him. On the night after the two of them discussed, the officials who went to the great Ming dynasty to ask for peace secretly departed. On the morning of the second day, Yuan Chuncheng changed into a brand new official uniform and led a group of personal attendants out of Hanoi City. They headed straight for Beidai City, which was 200 li away. Just as the group departed, a messenger from Jiaoji rushed to Beidai City ahead of them and explained the prime minister's intentions. Beidai City. With the arrival of Yang Qindong's main forces, the city changed again. The rich people who instigated others to attack the mercenaries were all dragged out of their homes. Anyone who dared to resist or disobey was killed without mercy. Yang Qindong admitted that he did not have a good temper when it came to people of other races. This was especially so for people who wanted to stab him in the back. His hatred would not last overnight, and he would take the opportunity to settle it. Under Yang Qindong's ruthless methods and policies, more than 20 rich people were brought out of their homes. In the beginning, there was some resistance. However, after more than 60 people from 2 families were killed, the rest became obedient. When the people were arrested, they were brought out of their homes obediently. Chapter 490. The orders of those who were brought out had already been decided. Just like in Chui City, the temporary small square was filled with wooden stakes. More than 20 people were tied to the stakes one by one. Then the common people gathered. The Han people were singled out and naturally became a special class, living a life of eating and wearing warm clothes. After meeting up with Chun Bo's 3 battalions, the army expanded to over 8,000 men. It was more than enough to clear out a small Beatty city. In an instant, the Han people were elated. The Jiaoji people became restless. Even when they slept at night, they didn't dare to close their eyes. They were afraid that the mercenaries would rush in and take them out to parade through the streets. It was no wonder that the people of Jiaoji were so worried. Every day, because of the Han people's accusations, some of the Jiaoji people who had bullied them in the past were dragged out of their warm beds in the middle of the night. Only the people of Jiaoji who had always been kind to others could truly sleep peacefully. In just 2 days, the atmosphere of the entire Beatty city changed, especially when the mercenaries announced that most of the people who were supposed to be captured had been captured. If there were no other accidents, they wouldn't disturb the lives of the commoners. Only then did the panic slowly subside. It was also at this time that news of Prime Minister Yuan Chuanqing's arrival for negotiations reached the ears of Yang Qindong. According to the news, Prime Minister Yuan would arrive at Beatty City by tomorrow afternoon at the latest. At that time, he hoped that everyone would be able to sit down peacefully for a discussion. Some of the Yangtze new army officers didn't agree with the Jiaoji people's request for negotiations or even submission. They believed that since the advantage was in their hands, the moment they arrived at Jiaoji, it was only natural that the country would be destroyed. But for some reason, the sixth young master actually agreed to the request for negotiations. He even said that he would welcome the other party into the city. When the news came out, many of the officers were confused. Those with bad tempers were even more upset. In other words, if the order had been given by Yang Qindong, or if it had been any other general, even Lang Song and Gao Xiong would have been criticized. The officers did not understand this decision and were conflicted. As the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front, Kong Jie immediately went to Yang Qindong and expressed his concerns. Kong Jie had a troubled look on his face. When he saw Yang Qindong, he said, "Sixth young master, regarding the negotiation with Jiaoji, the officers are quite upset. Although we can't see anything wrong with them, if we can't explain it clearly, it will affect the morale of the soldiers." Kong Jie did not come here to criticize Yang Qindong. He did not dare to do so. He was just reporting his concerns because of his duty. Regarding this, Yang Qindong could understand. He naturally had such a plan. Since Kong Jie came looking for him, it was time for him to give the officers an explanation. "All right, political commissar Kong, you don't have to be too anxious. Since this young master was the one who made the decision, I have my reasons. How about this? Inform all the officers and instructors of the various battalions to come for a meeting. This young master has something to say." Seeing that Yang Qindong wanted to personally explain the matter to everyone, Kong Jie was overjoyed. He immediately said, "This subordinate will inform them right away." In less than an hour, all the battalion commanders and instructors of the same rank in the city arrived at the general's residence. This used to be Pan Wenfei's residence, but he was now dead. Naturally, this place became Yang Qindong's temporary residence. More than 30 battalion commanders rushed over and stood orderly in the courtyard. Their eyes were fixed on Yang Qindong, who was looking up at the sky. This scene had been going on for quite a while. It was Yang Qindong who called them over, but the sixth young master did not say a word. He only looked up at the sky. Naturally, no one dared to rush him. They could only stand in standard military posture and straighten their bodies. After about the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Yang Qindong slowly lowered his head. To be honest, it was uncomfortable to look up at the sky for a long time. However, in order to remind these officers, there were some things that had to be done. It was a good thing that the officers could have their own opinions. However, if they dared to question the decision of their superior, they would not be allowed to do so. For example, a platoon commander only saw the soldiers of his platoon. That was bound to have limitations. A company commander only saw a company, unlike a battalion commander who could see the bigger picture. As the actual founder of the mercenary army, as well as the highest leader, Yang Qindong naturally saw the bigger picture. In order to accomplish this, it was inevitable that he would make some concessions. For example, allowing the Prime Minister of Jiaoji to negotiate was influenced by the bigger picture. As the territory grew larger in the future, the chances of something like this happening would also increase. He could not possibly explain it to his subordinates every single time. This time could be an exception, but it would only be limited to this one time. Through this incident, Yang Qindong wanted to tell everyone that they could doubt his decision, but they had to obey. Otherwise, they could just go back to wherever they wanted to go. There were no three-legged toads, but there were plenty of two-legged toads. Seeing that the time it took for an incense stick to burn had passed and the emotions of the officers had calmed down, Yang Chundong finally spoke. I don't care what you think of yourselves. I don't care what kind of dissatisfaction or opinions you have in your hearts. Right now, this young master wants to ask you all one question. With our current strength, can we take down all of Jiaoxi's cities without shedding any blood? Without shedding any blood? Hearing Yang Chundong's words, all of the officers shook their heads in unison. In terms of brute force, there were no cities in Jiaoxi that they could not take down. However, it was impossible for them to take down a city without using a single shot. Seeing that all of the officers were shaking their heads, Yang Chundong snorted coldly. A sharp glint flashed across his eyes. Since you can't do this, what right do you have to be arrogant? Why can't you have a proper discussion with the other party's envoy? Don't tell me that you want to show off your strength and disregard the safety of the Han civilians? Under the harsh criticism, the faces of some of the officers turned ugly. They only considered that their military strength was already very strong. The defense of Beatty City was the best example. Since they already had the initiative, why did they still have to negotiate? Wasn't this like a blind man lighting a lamp? However, when they heard Yang Chundong's questioning, they realized that such a rash action would cause the deaths of all the Han civilians in Jiaoxi. Since they could slaughter their way into the various cities of Jiaoxi, why couldn't the other party wipe out all the Han civilians in the city before they arrived? If that was the case, even if they killed the civilians, what would they gain? They were nothing more than empty cities with nothing to show for it. This was not their initial strategic goal. They wanted to open up another base here, not just to show off their tyrannical military strength. Could be said that when Yang Chundong said those words, many of the officers understood what was going on. They thought about how they were just ordinary civilians not long ago, living in an abyss of suffering. If it wasn't for the sixth young master who saved them, gave them authority, and gave them the most advanced firearms, some of them would have been dead by now. Most of them were still running around just to fill their stomachs. Where did the morale and drive come from? The officers who had figured everything out lowered their heads one by one. They were reflecting on their wrong thoughts. Seeing that the officers understood his intentions so quickly, Yang Chundong's expression turned slightly better. All right, I've explained everything to you. If anyone is still dissatisfied with the negotiations with Jiaoxi, feel free to voice it out. However, if you don't have any objections now, you are not allowed to discuss this matter when you return. Otherwise, I'll fire every single one of you. I won't care what contributions you've made in the past. When that time comes, don't say that I, the sixth young master, won't be merciful. No, the sixth young master is wise. A wave of awe sounded from below. It was no wonder that these officers were able to think things through so quickly. Previously, they were limited by their foresight, and their thoughts were limited as well. Now that they knew that the sixth young master was thinking for the sake of the Han people, how could the officers who used to be part of him not understand? Meeting adjourned if you've thought things through. If you have time, train more and help the people in the city. It's better than letting your imagination run wild every day. Yang Chundong waved his hand casually, and the courtyard, which was filled with people, was emptied in an instant. Other than the fact that Yang Chundong was the sixth young master, he was able to pacify the officers so quickly because he was thinking for the sake of the Han people. Did you think he wanted to negotiate with them? However, if he didn't do so and force Jiaoxi into a corner, they would vent their anger on the Han people within their borders. By then, it wouldn't just be one or two people dying. Both the information from the Security Bureau and the words of the surrendered Hong Jin proved that out of the less than 3 million people in Jiaoxi, there were at least 200,000 Han people. That was a ratio of 1 in 15. If all these Han people were killed, it would be a huge loss to the Han people. More importantly, many of these people had lived here since young. They had feelings for this place and knew how to build it. If a new batch of people were to come, they would have to adapt to this place all over again, and that would take up a lot of time. Right now, what Yang Chundong lacked the most was manpower and time. After all, the world was so big. Who knew how many years it would take to conquer it all? Chapter 491. There were some things that could only be done as quickly as possible. In this way, whether or not the Han people in Jiaoji could survive, and how many of them could survive, would be directly related to the issue of ruling over this place. After convincing these officers, they would go and convince the platoon officers, and the entire army would become stable again. At noon on the second day, a group of 200 people arrived at the west side of Beidai City. Ruan Chunqing arrived at Beidai City 4 hours earlier than planned, and it was enough to show their sincerity and anxiousness. They were afraid that the mercenaries would attack the other cities again, so they rushed over without stopping to rest. When Ruan Chunqing arrived at the city, according to the plan, 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pe and Political Commissar Kong Jie went out to welcome them and led them into Beidai City. Trying his best to maintain a smile, Ruan Chunqing greeted Luo Pe and Kong Jie before asking about Yang Qindong. "May I know where the Duke of Loyalty is? This time, this Prime Minister is under the orders of the Crown Prince to bring some gifts. The Duke of Loyalty is still inspecting the army. The Prime Minister Ruan is anxious. Why don't you take a look with us?" Political Commissar Kong Jie first smiled at Luo Pe, then turned to Ruan Chunqing and said in an unhurried tone, "All of this was planned." Ruan Chunqing was anxious to see Yang Qindong and test his intentions, so he wanted to use this opportunity to give him a good beating and let him see the morale and momentum of the mercenaries. When he heard that Yang Qindong was inspecting the army, a bitter expression flashed across Ruan Chunqing's face. To be able to become the Prime Minister, which one of them was an idiot? How could he not understand the meaning behind this? This was clearly a show of strength. But when he thought about it, he also wanted to use this opportunity to see the strength of the mercenaries. As the saying goes, only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Ruan Chunqing agreed. Then I will have to trouble the two generals. Under Luo Pe and Kong Jie's lead, they arrived at the northernmost part of the city. This was originally a trading market, but now it was occupied by the mercenaries as a temporary military camp. When they saw the temporary wooden fences from afar, they heard a neat battle cry. As the Prime Minister of the Jiaoji nation, Ruan Chunqing had seen all kinds of situations. He had even entered the military camp of Jiaoji countless times. However, this was the first time he had heard such a unified voice. He hadn't even seen anyone yet, but just from these deafening voices, he knew how high the morale of the mercenaries was. Ruan Chunqing's face changed slightly, which was noticed by Political Commissar Kong Jie, who was observing him from the side. Then he made a gesture of invitation with a smile. "Prime Minister Ruan, don't you want to see the Duke of Loyalty? He's inside, please." "All right, please, let's go together." Ruan Chunqing forcefully suppressed the fear in his heart and said with a forced smile. There was an entire platoon of Lung Feng on duty at the entrance of the barracks. Although it seemed that there was no problem with the security of Beidai City, this place had just been recovered, so it was necessary to be vigilant. The platoon leader in charge of the guards at the entrance was Lu Jian. He was from Mount Qishan of Ryukyu Island. A while ago, he was caught by the imperial guards at the Songru shop in Gaozhou Prefecture of the Southern Ming Dynasty. After passing the test, he didn't say a word about the mercenaries. A while ago, he made a military contribution in the defense of Beidai City and was promoted from an auxiliary platoon leader to a platoon leader of Lung Feng. This time, he was in charge of leading the platoon. When he saw the regiment commander and political commissar walking over with a group of people dressed in Jiaoji attire, he raised his right hand with a wooden expression and said loudly, "Any outsiders who want to enter the barracks are not allowed to carry weapons. Please remove your weapons." Ruan Chunqing's face turned ugly when he heard Lu Jian's words. If the mercenaries wanted to deal with him, it should be very easy. However, at least they had weapons on them, so they still had a trace of resistance. But if even their weapons were confiscated, then wouldn't they become fish on the chopping board? Wouldn't they be at the mercy of others? Ruan Chunqing didn't agree immediately. The guards beside him stepped forward and pulled out their swords, shouting, "Who dares to confiscate our weapons? We are here to negotiate as representatives of the Jiaoji army, not prisoners of a defeated army." Lu Jian narrowed his eyes and turned around to look at the row of Lung Feng soldiers behind him. The Lung Feng soldiers laughed out loud. Since he dared to use his saber in front of them, it just so happened that they hadn't fought for 2 days. It was a good opportunity to warm up. Seeing that Ruan Chunsheng had unsheathed his saber, his opponents in military green camouflage uniforms laughed instead of getting angry. Ruan Chunsheng's bodyguards' expressions turned ugly. This mission wasn't easy. If they didn't handle it well, they would be in danger of dying. Everyone was already mentally prepared for this. However, if they could avoid death, it would be best if they didn't die. But now that the situation had come to this, they didn't know what to do for a moment. They could only look at Ruan Chunsheng with troubled gazes and wait for the Prime Minister to speak. Ruan Chunsheng's expression didn't look any better. Although he was a little angry at the arrogance of the mercenaries, who wanted to confiscate his weapons as soon as they met, he was here to negotiate, not to surrender. However, he hated his guards even more. How could they pull out their swords without an order? If they angered the mercenaries, not only would they fail the negotiation, but they would also lose their lives here. Death. Of course, Ruan Chunsheng was afraid. However, he was also afraid that he wouldn't be able to complete the mission given to him by the Crown Prince. Therefore, when he saw the inquisitive looks from the guards, he turned to Luo Pe and Kong Jie and said, "Generals, we are guests after all. A host should treat his guests well." Seeing how thick-skinned Ruan Chunsheng was, Political Commissar Kong Jie spoke up before Luo Pe could say anything. "Apologies, we didn't invite you here. Even if you are a guest, you have to follow the host's rules." The moment he finished speaking, Ruan Chunsheng's expression turned ugly. This time, they were the ones who initiated the negotiation. In other words, they were the weaker party. It was difficult for them to be treated with respect. Without looking at Ruan Chunsheng's expression, Kong Jie's eyes fell on Lu Jian. Although he didn't say anything, his meaning was very clear. He wanted Lu Jian to do whatever he wanted, regardless of the fact that they were here. Lu Jian was a smart person to be able to become the platoon leader of the Cold Vanguard platoon. Seeing that the regiment commander and the political commissar had nothing else to say, he chuckled with a sinister look on his face. He raised his right hand and said to the 30 soldiers behind him, "Brothers, someone dares to show off his weapon in front of us. Cold Edge, what do you think we should do? What else can we do? Teach him a lesson." The 30 Cold Vanguard platoon members were already itching for a fight. Now that they received their platoon leader's order, they knew what to do. Each of them smiled as they took out shiny bayonets from their waists and equipped them with the 95-style spearhead. Not using bullets was already a form of respect for the Jiaoji guards. Otherwise, the battle would have ended before the fight even started. The 30 soldiers equipped with the 95-style spearhead smiled as they surrounded Ruan Chunsheng. However, even though they were smiling, their formation wasn't messed up at all. Instead, they formed a ring-shaped formation. In just a few breaths, more than 30 of Ruan Chunsheng's guards were tightly surrounded. Seeing that the enemy was approaching, the guards gripped their bayonets tightly. Then, the captain of the guards asked Ruan Chunsheng for instructions. "Since you are all young and are part of the military, a proper spar can improve everyone's relationship. However, you must remember that your subordinates must know their limits. There must be no deaths." Ruan Chunsheng could see that this battle was inevitable. However, he didn't want anyone to die. Otherwise, the negotiation would fail. That was why he reminded the captain of the guards. Speaking of which, as the Prime Minister of Jiaoji, Ruan Chunsheng's guards were naturally skilled. In a one-on-one battle with cold weapons, he couldn't think of any possibility of failure. After Ruan Chunsheng gave the order, the captain of the guards nodded immediately. Then, he said to the guards beside him, "Master said that no one can die. You must act appropriately." "All right." All the guards nodded in unison. However, compared to the Cold Vanguard platoon members who were orderly and gave the same command, these people's answers were more scattered. Seeing that the Jiaoji guards were ready, Lu Jian also pulled out the bayonet from his waist and inserted it into the 95-style spearhead. Then he said, "Team up with 3 people. Kill." When the word "kill" was uttered, the 30 Cold Vanguard platoon members' expressions changed. If it was said that there was still a hint of playfulness in their eyes just a moment ago, now all of them were much more focused. This was also due to Yang Qindong's usual teachings. In his words, mercy to the enemy was cruelty to the reader. Therefore, no matter what the situation was, as long as they fought, no matter how strong or weak the opponent was, they had to give it their all. This was the only way to ensure that they could unleash their full strength and not fail miserably. Under such teachings, the 30 Cold Vanguard platoon members' expressions turned serious when the word kill was uttered. It could be seen that they were in teams of 3 and quickly gathered together to form a team. They had undergone this training countless times. They were so familiar with it that the Jiaoji guards only saw a blur in front of their eyes. Suddenly, there were 3 enemies in front of them. Moreover, the 3 of them were back to back. After a rough look, it seemed like there were no openings for them to attack from. No matter which direction they attacked from, they would have to face the combined attacks of the 3 people. Chapter 492. This was the first time the guards saw this 3-3 formation, and they were at a loss of what to do. However, even though they were at a loss, it didn't mean that the Cold Vanguards would wait for an opportunity. Seeing their opponents' confused expressions, the 10 groups of Cold Vanguards launched their own fierce attacks. The dazzling white bayonets were everywhere. In just the blink of an eye, at least a dozen guards had been pierced by the bayonets and fell to the ground with a look of helplessness on their faces. Lu Jian also faced Ruan Chuanqing's guard captain with his bayonet. The only difference was that they were fighting one-on-one. The guard captain held a large machete in his hand. He was also tall and burly. In comparison, Lu Jian, who was only 1.78 meters tall, was at least half a head shorter than the guard captain. In terms of size, Lu Jian seemed to be at a disadvantage. This gave the guard captain a natural advantage, and he thought that Lu Jian couldn't withstand a single blow. However, just as this kind of underestimation was formed, a bayonet suddenly pierced towards his face. The guard captain's expression changed drastically. This kind of fierce attack made him lose focus for a moment, and then he instinctively raised his machete to block. Clang! Under the short exchange of weapons, the bayonet and machete clashed for a moment. Then, the bayonet that was knocked to the right suddenly turned around and stabbed towards the guard captain's waist. This move was so fast that it didn't seem to be a helpless move at all. It gave people the feeling that it was long prepared. To be able to become Ruan Chuanqing's trusted guard captain, his skills were naturally extraordinary. In order to obtain this position, he had competed for a long time and defeated many opponents. Therefore, even though the dagger was as fast as lightning, the captain still managed to dodge it at the last moment with a twist of his waist. This made Ruan Chuanqing, who was watching everything from the side, sigh in relief. Just as he thought that Lu Jian's attack was over, and it should be his guard captain's turn to counterattack, the bayonet suddenly turned around and left a bright red wound on the guard captain's waist. Hiss! After the sharp bayonet cut through his waist, the guard captain felt a burst of pain. His face couldn't help but twist and become a little terrifying. He had calculated everything, but he had never considered the uniqueness of the bayonet. It wasn't like a spear that could only stab. It wasn't like a saber that could only slash. It wasn't like a sword that could only stab. It wasn't like a sword that could only stab and slash. On the contrary, this bayonet could be used to stab, chop, whip, chop, and flick. It could be used to its fullest potential, and could form an extremely effective killing force. As such, when faced with such a weapon, if one were to view it as an ordinary weapon, it was inevitable that one would suffer a loss. Just like this time, the whipping stance left a bloody wound on his waist. As blood continued to drip from the wound, the guard captain felt that his reflexes and strength were gradually losing. The 30 or so guards were in the same situation as the head of the guards, or perhaps even worse. In front of the 3-3 battle formation, in front of the seemingly omnipotent bayonet, none of the guards could withstand a single blow from them. Often, the guards with some skills could block one bayonet attack, but the next bayonet would fly over, making it impossible to guard against and impossible to dodge. The moment Lu Jian injured the captain of the guards, the battle on this side had already ended. None of the 30 or so guards could stand. All of them were lying on the ground with injuries all over their bodies. This was because the Lung Feng soldiers didn't intend to kill and intentionally held back. If this was a real battlefield, it wouldn't be just 30 or so injured that were lying on the ground, but 30 or so corpses. Enough! Ruan Chuanqing's expression turned extremely ugly when he saw that the guards he was so proud of were all defeated in such a short period of time. He was afraid that more of his men would be injured or killed if this went on. Thus he roared loudly. When the country's prime minister put on a stern face, he naturally had an intimidating aura. Unfortunately, this aura was nothing in the eyes of Luo Pe and Kong Jie. On the contrary, the latter said in a mocking tone, "What's wrong? Prime Minister Ruan, are you afraid? If you are, you can go back to Hanoi City now and regroup. We will see who wins and who loses on the battlefield." He was obviously trying to provoke Ruan Chuanqing. How could Ruan Chuanqing respond? Although he was a little annoyed that his guards didn't give him face, he wouldn't forget what his mission was. Next, he pretended that he didn't hear anything and said, "Generals, I'm here to see the Duke of Loyalty. Please lead the way. The Duke of Loyalty is in the barracks, but you can't bring any weapons in." Kong Jie reminded with a smile, "This old man understands." This time, Ruan Chuanqing was straightforward. He reached out and took off the sword on his waist, which was used as an ornament, and handed it to a guard behind him who had just gotten up. Then he said to the head guard, "Put down your weapon and follow this old man in." Ruan Chuanqing's cooperation made Kong Jie speechless. In his heart, he sighed at Ruan Chuanqing's flexibility. He signaled Commander Luo Pe with his eyes. After seeing the other party nod in agreement, he smiled and said to Ruan Chuanqing, "Prime Minister Ruan, please." A fight broke out suddenly and ended quickly. In the end, Lung Feng won. Of course, Lung Feng had the advantage of being equipped with a bayonet, but more importantly, it was because of their cooperation. In other words, Lung Feng was Lung Feng. Even if he fought with cold weapons, one-on-one, or even one against many, he was still able to win. When they finally stepped into the barracks, they saw 5 guards every 3 steps and a sentry every 5 steps. These guards were all Lung Feng. Their training was basically over. What they needed to improve was their killing techniques and proficiency on the battlefield. Therefore, whenever Yang Chundong had the time, he would train the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers. Since they had the advantage in numbers, once they improved their battle prowess, it would be a huge boost to the overall battle prowess of the entire army. Under the guidance of Luo Pe and political commissar Kong Jie, Prime Minister Ruan Chuanqing led the head guard who had a piece of white cloth wrapped around his waist into the depths of the barracks. From afar, he saw a wide training field. There were thousands of soldiers practicing all kinds of drills. Some were practicing formation, some were practicing assassination, and some were practicing target shooting. There were also some huge logs placed there for a few people to hold together to train their strength. All in all, Ruan Chuanqing had never seen such a training method before. All of this gave him a sense of novelty. It was as if Granny Lu had entered the Grandview Garden. When he walked in front of a group of soldiers who were practicing walking under the slogan, 1, 2, 1, Ruan Chuanqing was very curious. He couldn't help but ask Luo Pe and Kong Jie beside him, "Generals, why are they practicing walking?" Of course, the 2 regimental officers wouldn't tell him the various benefits of proper formation training. They only smiled and pointed at a young man who was also dressed in camouflage clothing not far away. "That's the Duke of Loyalty. Let's go over." Oh. When he heard that Yang Chundong was right in front of him, Ruan Chuanqing set aside his curiosity and strode over to where Yang Chundong was. As he walked forward, his expression constantly changed. When he felt that the smile on his face was enough, he maintained this expression and walked over to Yang Chundong. "Duke, the Prime Minister of Jiaoji is here." Kong Jie's voice rang out respectfully and spread forward. Yang Chundong, who was watching the training on the field, didn't change his expression. It was as if he didn't hear Kong Jie at all and continued doing what he was supposed to do. After Kong Jie reported again, he didn't say anything else. He believed that the 6th young master must have heard what he said, but he didn't reply. There must be a reason why Kong Jie didn't ask anymore. Ruan Chuncheng, who was originally smiling, stood there awkwardly. A full quarter of an hour passed. During this time, Yang Chundong said something to a few of the officers beside him. He pointed out many problems with the soldiers' training, but he didn't say a word to them. He didn't even turn his head to look at them. This made Ruan Chuncheng's expression turn even uglier. If it wasn't for Crown Prince Li Yuanlong's voice in his mind, he would have probably left in a huff. Ahem. In the end, he had to fight for the opportunity himself. After adjusting his mentality, Ruan Chuncheng decided to speak up himself. Although it was embarrassing enough, it was better than standing there all the time. Your Excellency, I am the Prime Minister of Jiaoji Nation, Ruan Chuncheng. I am here on the orders of my Crown Prince to pay my respects. Ruan Chuncheng's voice wasn't soft. He shouted with qi in his dantian, so it was impossible for anyone not to hear him. In the end, Yang Chundong finally turned his head. Yang Chundong finally moved. Ruan Chuncheng wanted to take this opportunity to say something, but before he could speak, the ridiculously young Duke of Jiaoji spoke first. Are you the Prime Minister of Chiha from Jiaoji? Since we are here to talk business, where is Hong Jin? I will leave this matter to you. 2 meters behind Yang Chundong stood the captive general of Jiaoji, Hong Jin. He was here to observe how the mercenaries trained under Yang Chundong's permission. According to the 6th young master's intention, Jiaoji would have its own army in the future, and the commander of this army would most likely be handed over to Hong Jin. When Hong Jin first heard this news, he was extremely excited. He originally surrendered to save his life, but now he really wanted to serve under Yang Chundong. It was as if he had the opportunity to come to the training ground. He stared at everything without blinking. He only wanted to learn the mercenaries' training methods so that he could form a strong army in the future. Chapter 493. He was still in the middle of studying when Ruan Chuncheng's sudden arrival attracted his attention. As a former deputy general of Jiaoji, how could he not know the Prime Minister of Jiaoji? It was just that with his previous status, he couldn't talk to him at all and could only watch from afar. Just now, Ruan Chuncheng's performance fell into Hong Jin's eyes. When he saw the high and mighty Prime Minister bowing to the 6th young master, he didn't know why, but he felt a burst of joy in his heart. He originally felt inferior because he was a surrendered general, but now it seemed that there was no difference between him and the Prime Minister. Just as he was thinking about this, Yang Chundong suddenly called out his name. This made him tremble and he couldn't believe what he had just heard. While Hong Jin was still in shock, Tiger's Mane, who was beside Yang Chundong, had already handed him a piece of paper with words written on it. This is the request for the negotiation. Take a good look. This is also a chance for you to perform well. Seize it. Tiger's Mane patted Hong Jin's shoulder as he spoke. This seemingly inconspicuous action made Hong Jin very excited. Who didn't know what kind of person Tiger's Mane was? He was Yang Chundong's most trusted person. Even regimental officers like Luope and Kong Jie were very respectful in front of him. It was definitely Hong Jin's honor that Tiger's Mane thought highly of him. The excited Hong Jin immediately straightened his chest and said with an incomparably firm tone, "Please rest assured, Tiger's Mane and Tiger's Mane, I will definitely handle this matter well." Hong Jin promised solemnly. Under Tiger's Mane's signal, he came in front of Ruan Chuncheng and stretched out his right hand. "Prime Minister Ruan, I will be in charge of the negotiation. Please." Ruan Chuncheng's original intention was to negotiate with Yang Chundong. In his opinion, this was the only way to have an equal relationship. However, Ruan Chuncheng ignored him. If he insisted on staying here, who knew what would happen? Ruan Chuncheng didn't want to ruin their relationship before the negotiation, so he could only sigh and agree. "Thank you, General Hong." Being addressed so politely by Ruan Baiqing, Hong Jin's face was full of joy. "Well said, Prime Minister Ruan, please." Hong Jin's face was full of confidence, but when he really looked at Yang Chundong's conditions, he couldn't help but have a headache. Never in his wildest dreams did he expect the 6th young master's demands to be so harsh. The higher-ups actually demanded that Jiaoji hand over all the cities other than Hanoi City. They also demanded that the Jiaoji army disarm themselves and hand over their weapons. How was this a negotiation? It was clearly forcing the other party to perish. He did not think that Ruan Chuncheng would agree. Therefore, when the two of them walked out of the military camp and found a quiet courtyard to sit down, Hong Jin was prepared for Ruan Chuncheng to get angry and leave. In fact, Ruan Chuncheng was very angry when he saw Yang Qindong's demands. This was an impossible condition. Fortunately, he didn't come to negotiate but to buy time. Therefore, he didn't leave in anger like Hong Jin expected. Instead, he said seriously that the Jiaoji nation wouldn't accept such conditions and asked them to lower their standards before negotiating. Ruan Chuncheng suddenly said such nice words, and he didn't even say a word of anger. This made Hong Jin feel that it was unrealistic. The Beidai city general's residence was now Yang Qindong's resting place. After dark, Hong Jin came to the inner courtyard after being notified. He saw Yang Qindong, who had just finished his dinner and was drinking tea and resting. "Greetings, Duke of Loyalty and Courage." Hong Jin knelt on the ground with a plop and said sincerely. He wanted to call him the sixth young master, but he knew that with his current status, he didn't have the right to do so. "You're here. How's the situation?" Yang Qindong stretched out his hand and gestured for Hong Jin to get up. He also asked about the negotiations. "Duke of Loyalty, I have already talked to Prime Minister Ruan. He thinks that our demands are too high. He hopes that we can lower our standards," Hong Jin said honestly. "Lower your standards?" Yang Qindong's face flashed with an unknown smile. "He's not angry?" Hearing Yang Qindong's question, Hong Jin was stunned at first. Then, he thought for a while and said, "He's a little angry, but he doesn't show it. Ha ha. Ha ha ha." At this moment, Yang Qindong couldn't help but laugh out loud. He had made demands and conditions that were impossible for the other party to fulfill, but the other party didn't turn hostile or get angry. He only said that the demands were too high. What did this mean? Could only mean that the other party didn't really want to surrender at all. Everything was just to stall for time. So, no matter what request Yang Qindong made, they would use all kinds of reasons to reject it. The so-called negotiations, Jiaoji wasn't sincere, and Yang Qindong was never serious. This was just a way for everyone to test each other. Through this test, Yang Qindong got the result he wanted. That was, the other party was indeed stalling for time. They should be planning something. Before they were ready, they wouldn't easily turn hostile. After understanding this, Yang Qindong knew what to do. He said to Hong Jin, who was still standing on the opposite side waiting for orders, "How about this, when you talk to the other party tomorrow, just say this." At the same time, in a courtyard temporarily provided for Ruan Chuncheng, the Prime Minister of Jiaoji had also finished his meal and was chatting with the guard captain beside him. "You've seen the training ground today, right? With your experience, if we were to go against the mercenaries now, what are our chances of winning?" Ruan Chuncheng asked with interest. Although it was true that he was the Prime Minister, he didn't know much about military affairs, unlike the guard beside him, who was originally a military man. Seeing the Prime Minister asking so seriously, the guard captain hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. "The mercenaries' morale is very high. If we were to go against them now, I'm afraid we would lose." "What are our chances of winning?" After Ruan Chuncheng asked, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "Just say it boldly. There are only the two of us here." After receiving the Prime Minister's encouragement, the guard captain looked eager to give it a try. Then he slowly squeezed out two words. 20%? Hearing the words, Ruan Chuncheng looked at the guard captain suspiciously. Being stared at, the guard captain lowered his head and squeezed out two words with difficulty. 10%. Only 10%. Hearing this answer, Ruan Chuncheng was clearly very dissatisfied. "Yes, with our current weapons and equipment, it's only 10%. However, if we can have more metal shields, perhaps we can increase it a little. If there's any way to make the mercenaries hesitate, then our chances of winning will be even higher," the guard captain answered honestly. Ruan Chuncheng knew that this was the truth, but this result still made him very dissatisfied. He couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Then he began to think in his heart. The crown prince had already ordered people to forge metal shields and even said that he wanted to build mobile metal carriages. If that was the case, then it wasn't like they wouldn't be able to retaliate at all. Thinking about how he had already sent people to the southern Ming Empire, if they could pressure the Duke of Loyalty, then their chances of winning would increase. Sigh, what we lack is time. Yuan Chunqing sighed. Whether it was forging metal shields, metal carriages, or going to the southern Ming Empire to ask for help, they all needed time. However, would the mercenaries give them enough time? How could he delay? It seems that there is a need to make some concessions on some matters. Yuan Chunqing muttered to himself. The first negotiation ended without any results. The next morning, without waiting for Hong Jin to leave, Yuan Chunqing took the initiative to look for him. It was no wonder that he couldn't keep his cool. After all, in comparison, he was under more pressure. Hong Jin was still thinking about how to complete the task given to him by the sixth young master. Now that Yuan Chunqing took the initiative to look for him, he was no longer in a hurry. He smiled and invited the prime minister, whom he once looked up to sit in his courtyard and drink tea. The initiative was already in his hands, so of course, Hong Jin wasn't in a hurry. However, Yuan Chunqing couldn't. Although he wanted to pretend to be very shrewd, the situation didn't spare him. Seeing that the two of them sat together and drank 2 pots of tea, he couldn't help but take the initiative to say, "General Hong, do you think we can continue the negotiation yesterday?" "Wait, I drank too much tea. I need to go to the toilet." Hong Jin didn't wait for Yuan Chunqing to finish his sentence. He pretended to be in a hurry to pee, apologized, and left. Seeing how arrogant Hong Jin was, the prime minister's guard said indignantly, "A petty man intoxicated by success." Of course, Yuan Chunqing heard this. He already knew about Hong Jin's background, and even knew that he was from the Hong family. In the past, even if someone introduced him, whether he wanted to meet such a small figure depended entirely on his mood. Now, he was the one putting on airs. Of course, he was angry. However, when he considered the big picture, he had to suppress his anger. Forget it, a great man knows when to yield, right? So what if he lowered his head in front of this petty man? Once Zhaoji obtained the final victory, not only Hong Jin, but also the entire Hong family, he wouldn't let them off easily. After comforting himself in his heart, Hong Jin waited for nearly an hour before returning to the courtyard with a satisfied look on his face. When he entered, he pretended to be embarrassed and said, "Aya, my stomach isn't feeling well. Sorry for making you wait, Prime Minister." Chapter 494. Although his words sounded nice, he did not seem to be apologetic at all. Yuan Chunqing did not want to lower himself to his level. As long as he could stall for time and let the other party be proud of himself, so what? "General Hong, are you all right now? Can we continue with the discussion about yesterday's matter? After all, you are a citizen of Zhaoji, and the Hong family is the cornerstone of Zhaoji. For this reason, can we compromise a little?" Seeing Hong Jin sit down again, Yuan Chunqing was afraid that the other party was up to no good. So he said all these in one breath. "Compromise a little? How?" Hong Jin pretended not to understand and asked, "Let's see if we can cede a few cities to the Duke of Loyalty. As you know, yesterday's request is no different from wiping out the entire Zhaoji. I really can't agree to it." Yuan Chunqing said shamelessly. "No." Unexpectedly, Hong Jin shook his head and rejected the offer directly. "Please don't, General Hong. For the sake of the Hong family, please compromise a little. Don't worry, when I return, I will promote the people of the Hong family and make them one of the top 6 families. What do you think?" This time, in order to achieve his goal, Yuan Chunqing was really going all out. He could make any kind of promise as long as he could buy some time. As expected, when he mentioned the Hong family, especially when he said that he could make the entire Hong family one of the top 6 families, Hong Jin's eyes lit up, as if he was tempted. "General Hong, you must help me." Yuan Chunqing begged for mercy again. Although he could not make the decision on important matters, if he was willing to help, he could buy some time. Perhaps it was because of Yuan Chunqing's humble attitude, or the benefits of the Hong family. This time, Hong Jin did not reject immediately. Instead, he sat there and closed his eyes. After a few breaths, he suddenly opened his eyes and shook his head again. It still won't work. The Duke of Loyalty wants Jiaoji to be completely submissive. It won't work if we give you a few cities. Hearing that it still won't work, Ruan Chunqing really wanted to cry. But fortunately, Hong Jin suddenly said, "This method won't work, but there is another method that we can try." Hearing that there was still hope, Ruan Chunqing suddenly became energetic. He quickly reached out and grabbed Hong Jin's arm and asked, "Is there any other way?" Seeing how agitated Ruan Chunqing was and how hard he was grabbing his arm, a painful expression flashed across Hong Jin's face. "Hurry up and let go. You're hurting me." Oh, it's my fault." "Oh right, General Hong, if you have any ideas, please tell us quickly." Seeing how easily Ruan Chunqing apologized and how anxious he was, Hong Jin felt that the time was right and said slowly, "I'm sure you know what the loyal Duke did after he took over Beidong City since you've been here for a day. What did I do?" Facing this question, Ruan Chunqing was puzzled and thought hard. As expected of a prime minister, his mind worked quickly. It was unknown what he thought of, but he suddenly raised his head to look at Hong Jin and asked, "General Hong, are you referring to Duke Zhongwei's policy towards the Han and Jiaoji people?" Hearing that the topic was about to be discussed, Hong Jin couldn't help but be amazed at how smart the other party was. He nodded at this moment. "That's right. The loyal Duke is very good to his own people. This general has heard from him more than once that he is worried about the status and living conditions of the Han people in Jiaoji. If we can work on this aspect, we might be able to cater to his interests and give Jiaoji a chance to breathe." Hearing this, Ruan Chunqing's mind spun quickly. He thought that if he could really work on the Han people, wouldn't he be able to buy some time for the Crown Prince? This was the new request that Hong Jin received when he visited Yang Chendong last night. Previously, Yang Chendong was worried that the Han people would suffer losses if a war broke out. It would be great if they could save them in advance. Right at this moment, Ruan Chunqing arrived. Yang Chendong wouldn't believe that the other party wanted to negotiate or even surrender. It was already good enough that Jiaoji was under the Ming dynasty's jurisdiction. However, this wasn't the result that Yang Chendong wanted. If he wanted to raise the status of the Han people, it wasn't just about convincing the enemy. It wasn't even important to convince them. After all, who knew what would happen the next day if they were convinced today? If the current generation was convinced, what would the next generation be like? The best solution wasn't to place hope on others, but to do something with one's own abilities. For example, if Jiaoji was completely destroyed and handed over to the Han people to rule, even if there were disloyal people in the future, wouldn't it be like meat rotting in a pot? Thus, from the start, Yang Chendong had no intention of letting Jiaoji off. No matter what price the other party had to pay, it was the same. However, the reason why he agreed to negotiate was because there were some things that he needed to prepare. With the 10,000 soldiers in his hands, defeating the Jiaoji army wouldn't be a problem. The problem was that after defeating the Jiaoji army, he wouldn't have enough strength to rule this place. He didn't want to work so hard only to benefit someone else in the end. Thus, the problem of population was the problem. In order to achieve his goal of ruling this place, Yang Chendong had already sent a message to Qiqian City, asking them to gather some people and move them to Jiaoji. This would solve the problem of governance after the departure of the Lungfeng army and expand the Yang faction's influence and territory. It would take time for those people to arrive. Yang Xie's navy was about to attack Juzhen Prefecture and other places, so it would take time as well. Thus, why not take advantage of this time to get the Han people of Jiaoji over? That way, he wouldn't have to worry about people venting their anger on them or using them to threaten him in the upcoming war. This was why he gave Hong Jin a new mission after meeting him last night. This was why Hong Jin seemed to be persuaded by Ruan Chunqing and took the initiative to give him ideas. Otherwise, with Hong Jin's status as a surrendered general, how would he dare to come up with such an idea and make such a decision? However, how would Ruan Chunqing know all of this? Furthermore, with his worldview and outlook on life, if there was a day when Jiaoji attacked the Great Ming, he would definitely not consider the lives of the Jiaoji people living in the Great Ming. It was precisely because of this different understanding that he decided to agree to Hong Jin's idea immediately after hearing it. However, he was still a little worried about whether Hong Jin's guess was right or not. What if everything was what they thought and the Duke of Zhongdong attacked them? Wouldn't that be bad? After making up his mind, Ruan Chuncheng looked at Hong Jin with a burning gaze. General Hong, are you sure that as long as we send all the Han people in the country over, the Duke of Zhongdong will sit down and negotiate with us? I'm not sure. Hong Jin shook his head honestly, but then he said, but I know that doing this can stall for time, right? And if we can stall for time, we will have time to think of a better way, right? The moment Hong Jin said that, Ruan Chuncheng's heart began to beat faster. He thought that the other party had seen through his intentions. However, when he heard the last sentence, he couldn't help but relax. Yes, doing this could indeed stall for time. Even if they couldn't think of a better idea during this time, at least this could prevent the war from happening immediately. This would give the Crown Prince and the messenger to the Great Ming more time to prepare. Thinking that this was originally a matter with only benefits and no harm, Ruan Chuncheng nodded and agreed. Okay, we will do as General Hong said. I will send someone to send a letter to the Crown Prince and send all the Han people in the country here. However, this is a huge project. I'm afraid that it can't be done in a year or half a year. The last sentence was said by Ruan Chuncheng tentatively, because if there was really a year or half a year, the Crown Prince would be able to prepare. Once the iron shields and iron chariots could be manufactured, they would have a chance to fight against the mercenaries. At that time, with the advantage of the number of troops and the fact that they were fighting on their home ground, the chances of winning were not small. What? Half a year or a year? Haha, Prime Minister Ruan, don't joke around. Do you think the Duke of Zhongdong will agree? When Hong Jin heard that it would take such a long time, he couldn't help but laugh. He didn't forget that Yang Chundong set a time limit when he gave him this task last night. Ruan Chuncheng didn't really expect that it would take so long. After all, the Jiaoji country wasn't big. It wasn't like the Great Ming where it took a long time to walk from the south to the north. When he saw that he couldn't test Hong Jin, he asked in a consulting tone, then according to General Hong, how long is it appropriate to do this thing? Hong Jin didn't speak immediately. Instead, he raised his hand and stretched out 5 fingers. 5 months? Seeing this gesture, Ruan Chuncheng instinctively said, no. Hong Jin shook his head. Then it's 50 days. When he said this, Ruan Chuncheng had a bad feeling in his heart. But Hong Jin still shook his head after hearing this. Then, he said in an unquestionable tone, 5 days. If it's more than that, I can't guarantee that I can convince the Duke of Zhongdong. What? 5 days? That's impossible. Ruan Chuncheng jumped up from the chair and said in an agitated tone. Not to mention that he originally wanted to use this matter to delay time. Even if he really wanted to do it, it was absolutely impossible to do it in 5 days. From some places in Jiaoji to Beidai City, 5 days was far from enough. Chapter 495. As if he already knew that Ruan Chuncheng would have such a reaction, Hong Jin retracted his 5 fingers and spread out his hands. If that's the case, then there's nothing to talk about. I'll go report to the Duke of Loyalty. Maybe after lunch today, they will send troops to Hanoi City. After saying this, Hong Jin stood up and looked like he was about to leave. How could Ruan Chuncheng let Hong Jin leave like this? If that was the case, wouldn't his lobbying mission have failed? Therefore, he immediately reached out and pressed on Hong Jin's shoulder. General Hong, is there anything we can discuss? How about this? How about 3 months? 6 days. 2 months. 7 days. 1 month. 8 days. Half a month. 9 days. The two of them were like peddlers and finally set the time at 10 days. 10 days was the date Yang Chundong gave to Hong Jin, because within 10 days, Yang Chundong could basically prepare for war. In such a short time, there would definitely be some Han people who couldn't come because they lived too far away. This was something that couldn't be helped. A long night was fraught with problems. If there were a few hundred or even 1,000 Hans in 1 or 2 cities that did not arrive, Yang Chendong would definitely not allow that to happen. 10 days naturally made Yuan Chunqing somewhat dissatisfied. But he also thought that when the time came, he would just delay a bit and try to send some people over within 10 days. After 10 days, there would be more people coming. He didn't believe that at that time, the Duke of Loyalty would really dare to start a war. With each having their own plans, the two sides reached a temporary agreement. Yuan Chunqing wrote a letter personally and sent it to the Crown Prince in Hanoi City. After that, the war in Jiaoji obtained a temporary peace. Yunnan Ping Shi Wang residence. The Mu family, which was the closest to Jiaoji, had been planting their own intelligence agents in Jiaoji. They were the first to know that Yang Chendong had suddenly appeared outside Chui City with his mercenaries and occupied the city. Then, he had sent his troops to Bei Dai City and occupied the city. After receiving the news, Mu Bin immediately sent the information to the southern Ming Emperor, Zhu Qizhen. After that, he called Wang Ji, the current Right Assistant Minister of the Ministry of War, to help him analyze the current situation. Along with Wang Ji was the outstanding disciple of the Mu family. Muong was not even 30 years old, but he had been in the army for more than 10 years. This child of the Mu family, who had entered the military camp in his teens, not only had extraordinary skills, he was also abnormally brave and fierce when fighting. He became one of the young people of the Mu family that Mu Bin valued the most. The three of them were sitting in the side hall of Lord Shiping's mansion. The reason why they didn't call anyone else over was because they wanted to discuss the main point of the matter. Under such a chaotic situation, how should the Mu family make a decision? When discussing such an important matter that concerned the interests of the Mu family, the fewer people who knew about it, the better. Although Muong was still young, he was eloquent and calm in the face of trouble. It was natural to call him over. Wang Ji was even more so. As someone who had been abandoned by Emperor Ingzong, he had no choice but to rely on the Mu family. His thoughts were naturally for the sake of the Mu family. As someone who almost became the minister of the Ministry of War, he naturally had good judgment. Calling him over was a good opportunity to listen to his views on the current situation. Wang Mubin of Shiping was sitting between the two of them. He listened to their opinions without saying a word. The three of them knew about the news. Next, it was time to express their views. The first to speak was the young Muong. He first took the information and carefully read it 3 times. Then he shook his head. This is not possible. Everyone knows how many people there are in the mercenaries. It was not easy for them to come out alive with more than 10,000 people. How could they fight their way to the inner part of Jiaoji and occupy 2 cities? They even forced their way to Hanoi City? Is there a mistake in the information? It was no wonder that Muong would think this way. It was because he could not do the same thing. Although he was considered a general of the Mu clan, even if he was given 100,000 soldiers, he would not be able to do things so beautifully, let alone 10,000. The information can't be fake. This information has been verified. Mu Bin saw that Wang Ji also did not believe it, so he spoke up to confirm the authenticity of the information. As for the verification he mentioned, it was naturally the same information sent by another intelligence team. For a matter, one person's words could be wrong and could not be trusted completely. However, when everyone said the same thing, there was no doubt that it was true. Originally, Wang Ji also wanted to question this matter. Now that he heard Mu Bin's words, he quickly shut his mouth. If he still doubted it at this time, it was equivalent to doubting Lord Shiping. For him who had offended Emperor Ingzong and had nowhere to go, if he did not cling to Mu Bin's thigh, he would really become a nobody in the world. As soon as Mu Bin said this, the side hall suddenly quieted down again. Obviously, everyone needed to digest this information. Then, after waiting for about 10 minutes, seeing that the two beside him had almost recovered, Mu Bin opened his mouth again and asked, "Okay, now you can say whatever you want to say. There are only the 3 of us here, so you are not allowed to speak nonsense." The so-called nonsense meant that they could say whatever they wanted. Once they left the room, they would not say it again. No one would be punished for it. Since they could say whatever they wanted, Wang Ji's small eyes rolled for a moment before he said, "If all of this is true, then the combat strength of this mercenary group is too powerful. This loyal duke is too ambitious." "What do you mean?" Mu Bin felt that Wang Ji seemed to be implying something. Seeing that Mu Bin was interested, Wang Ji knew that the opportunity to show off had come. He did not hold back and said everything that was in his mind. "Lord Sheeping, think about it. If this is really done by the mercenary group, then how powerful is their strength? With such strength, why did it take nearly 2 months when the imperial court asked him to deal with the Huang bandits? With their tyrannical strength, they could just push forward. After a few battles, the untrained and disorderly Huang bandit army would scatter and flee in all directions. Not only that, if he really wanted to solve the emperor's problem and did his best, he could have come to quell the chaos in Yunnan after eliminating the Huang bandits. At that time, Prince Min was not powerful yet. He would have had the chance to kill them in Yunnan. Then, the current situation would not have been so complicated." In one breath, Wang Ji said a lot, which faintly revealed a fact. He had always thought that the mercenary group did not fully display their strength, but was hiding it. Then may I ask, under what circumstances should one intentionally conceal one's strength? Could it be that he was plotting something big? Or even the reverse? Did he deliberately want to see something happen? Did he deliberately want to see the chaos become bigger and bigger so that he could benefit from it? After all, anyone who had an invincible army would want to have space to display their strength. Otherwise, wouldn't the jewelry be covered in dust? It had to be said that Wang Ji's deduction did make some sense. Mu Bin had also heard those words, but even though they had already thought of this point, they were still unable to see through Yang Qindong's grand goal of wiping out Jiaoji, raising the prestige of the Han people and dominating the world. It was not because of other reasons, but because their vision was too narrow. Although they were considered to be in a high position, their eyes were always on the Ming dynasty, and they were also in this environment. Since young, they were taught that the outside world was a barbarian land, and it was incomparably desolate. The center of the world was the Ming dynasty, and those places were pitifully poor. What was the use of occupying them? It was under such conservative thinking that Mu Bin asked such a question. So, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is deliberately hiding his strength. But why is he doing this? What is the use of damaging Jiaoji? Does he really want to occupy that place? Although this prince has never been there, I have heard many people say that the land there is small, and there are many people there. It is very poor. Using Mu Bin's words, Wang Ji also said, "Of course, he doesn't want to occupy that place. There are no benefits there. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is doing this to show off his strength. This way, others will be wary of him and then he can achieve his goal." Goal? What goal? This time, it was Muong who asked. Wang Ji smiled proudly, and then asked Muong, "General Mu, this old man wants to ask you, after hearing about the strength of the mercenary army, if you were to lead an army to fight him, what are your chances of winning?" Muong's face turned red as if he had been asked a question. He wanted to say that he was not afraid of the mercenary army, but when he thought about the way they attacked Jiaoji, it was not something he could do. This courage dissipated in a short time, and he had to shake his head and say, "If the two armies really fight and fight with swords and spears, I'm afraid our Mu family will not be able to gain any advantage." Hearing Muong's answer without confidence, Wang Ji not only did not make sarcastic remarks, but also nodded. "Let's see. Even the Mu family army does not have the confidence to win. Then whether it is Ingzong or Min Wang, how can they talk about winning? This is equivalent to obtaining victory in terms of momentum before the battle. If they want to use this momentum to ask for something from the emperor, how can they not agree?" At this point, Mu Bin, who was sitting at the side, finally seemed to have thought it through. Does official Wang mean that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage wants to be a king like this prince? There is indeed such a possibility. After all, we have received news before that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is very persistent about the throne. Wang Ji nodded and said seriously. Chapter 496. He also wants to be a king? Why? How can the emperor agree so easily? When Muong heard this, he didn't think much of it. The reason why the Mu family was so powerful now was because Mu Bin was conferred the title of king. However, if anyone could be conferred the title of king, then the title of king wouldn't be important, and it wouldn't bring so much glory to the family. In Muang's eyes, it was better to have fewer and fewer kings in the world. This way, the king's status would be more important, and he would have more confidence when he spoke. Muong wasn't the only one who thought this way. Mu Bin also had the same idea. He opened his mouth and added, "I'm afraid it won't be so easy to be a king. Will the emperor agree so easily?" "Of course not," Wang Ji replied with a very certain tone. Then, as if he was afraid that the two people didn't believe him, he continued, "King General Mu, think about it. The reason why the Mu family can be conferred the title of king is because you have guarded the southwest for the great Ming dynasty for generations. In addition, your influence is only big in this place. Even if you are conferred the title of king, the emperor won't be so afraid. However, the Duke of Loyalty is different. He is young, and his influence is not only in the southern Ming dynasty but also in Baiming. If such a person is conferred the title of king, wouldn't it be asking for trouble? More importantly, if there is a war in the future, how will the Duke of Loyalty be rewarded for his meritorious service? Isn't the emperor above the king? Does the Duke of Loyalty have disloyal thoughts?" Hearing this, Sheeping King Mu Bin's expression couldn't help but change again and again. Whether he has disloyal thoughts or not, no one knows. But once there is a slight possibility, we must be prepared. Presumably, on this point, Emperor Ingzong must have considered more than us and is more thorough. That's why this old man said it's not easy to confer the title of king. Wang Ji's understanding of Yang Qindong was limited, so he naturally didn't dare to rashly judge some things. However, based on his understanding of Zhu Qizhen, seeing that he was so wary of Yang Qindong, this inference was extremely reasonable. After saying so much, Mu Bin and Mu Ong finally understood. The reason why Yang Qindong suppressed Jiaoji was to use this opportunity to display his military prowess and obtain benefits from Zhu Qizhen. Now, it was up to the emperor to decide. After thinking it through, Mu Ong suddenly chuckled. Speaking of which, the loyal duke took a roundabout route for the sake of fame. In order to achieve this goal, he must have paid a heavy price to enter the Jiaoji army. Mu Ong couldn't be blamed for saying that. He knew how strong the Jiaoji army was. Although it was still a bit worse than the Mu family's army, it was not by much. The mercenaries could win against them, but they should also be the kind that would kill 1,000 of the enemy and lose 800 of their own men. And the price he paid was nothing more than a throne, and it was very likely that he would not be able to obtain it. If that was the case, wouldn't it be equivalent to putting in effort for nothing? But no matter what, this matter had nothing to do with the Mu family army. Regardless of whether the Jiaoji army suffered heavy losses or the mercenaries were heavily injured, they were happy to see it happen. Now that the matter seemed to have been cleared up, everyone's previous worries also disappeared. This originally had nothing to do with the Mu family army. Moreover, no matter how strong the mercenaries were, it was impossible for them to find trouble with the Mu family army after defeating the Jiaoji army. Not to mention that they did not have any conflicts before. Even if they really fought with the Mu family army, what good would it do? Even if there were no benefits, who would be willing to do it? After knowing that no matter how the war developed, it had nothing to do with him, Mu Bin's expression completely relaxed. All right, just send people to keep an eye on this matter. As for how it will develop, there must be someone who has a bigger headache than us. Mu Bin's words were correct. Prince of Min's faction also had the same attitude as him, but they did not care about their own affairs. They were currently thinking of using all their strength to conquer the entire Guangdong province. This was because during this period of time, they had sent troops everywhere and conquered many cities in Guangxi that they had yet to reclaim. Now that the entire Guangxi was in their hands, they naturally set their sights on Guangdong, especially the important Guang province. The person who Mu Bin said would have a bigger headache was naturally the southern Ming imperial court. The Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was the first to receive the news, was in a good mood. When Yang Qindong left Gaozhou Prefecture and went straight to Liang Mountain, he also brought Guanning, Ma Wei, Yu Guang, and other generals out of Gaozhou Prefecture and took a detour to Guangzhou Prefecture. After a round of recruitment, in addition to the support of the imperial court, 10,000 southern Ming soldiers quickly gathered in the Guangzhou Prefecture and had a certain amount of military strength. However, it was also at this time that all kinds of news came from the front. Some were good and some were bad. The so-called bad news was naturally that the Min King and the Miao army had attacked everywhere and finally conquered the entire Guangxi, allowing the Min King's forces to develop even more. There was even news that they were gathering troops. The next target would probably be the Guangzhou Prefecture that they were in. After all, as long as they conquered this place, the entire Guangdong province would not be far from falling into the enemy's hands. For this, other than continuously strengthening the city's defenses and recruiting troops, Kuang Yi continuously sent urgent documents to the capital and Nanjing to request for more support from the imperial court. Other than the bad news, there was also good news. For example, he just received the news that the Duke of Loyalty had brought his mercenaries and killed his way into Jiaoxi. Not only did they pass through the complicated terrain of the Liang Mountain rainforest, but they also took over Jiaoxi's Tsui City and Beatty City. The southern Ming spy in Jiaoxi said that the current Jiaoxi could not even take care of itself. When this news entered Kuang Ye's hands, he was so happy that he almost jumped up. Now that Jiaoxi was entangled, he would not be able to think about sending troops out of southern Ming. Didn't this mean that they had one less opponent? Kuang Yi was not only old, but his thinking was also very old. In his opinion, the Min King was surnamed Zhu and had the bloodline of Emperor Taizu. The battle with the emperor was an internal battle of the Zhu family. No matter what, the world still belonged to the Zhu family. They could not let an outsider take advantage of it. Good. The Duke of Loyalty is indeed powerful. The mercenaries did not disappoint. With the news that had just arrived, Kuang Yi, who had not smiled for a long time, drank 3 large cups of wine in his temporary residence. He even called his student, Guaning, over to drink with him. Guaning did not understand why Kuang Yi was so happy. Seeing that the drinking stopped, he asked carefully, "Teacher, this is the victory of the Duke of Loyalty. Why are you so happy? Why can't I be happy?" Kuang Yi, who was in a good mood, decided to teach his student well. He asked, "Tell me, if the mercenaries led by the Duke of Loyalty fought with the tyrannical Jiaoxi army, who would win in the end?" This? Guaning shook his head. The strength of the mercenaries is indeed tyrannical, especially the continuous fire guns in their hands. No matter who is their enemy, they won't be able to gain any advantages. But in the end, their military strength is too little. They can still win some battles, but to say that they can really wipe out the entire Jiaoxi army is unrealistic. That's right. Kuang Yi nodded with satisfaction and said, "According to what you said, the mercenaries will fight with the Jiaoxi army until both sides suffer losses. If this is the result, it will only be good for the great Ming dynasty." At this moment, Guaning finally understood. Then he said tentatively, "Teacher, you mean that this is a battle between 2 tigers. There will be casualties. Even the one who wins won't get any benefits, right?" "That's right." Kuang Yi stroked his beard and said, "Actually, I admire the Duke of Loyalty very much. A hero like him probably wouldn't appear even in a few hundred years. Even Emperor Taizu was not as good as him when he was at his age. If such a person was born in a chaotic world, he would be able to create a new country. It's a pity that he was born in the wrong time. Although our great Ming dynasty is also experiencing war, our foundation is still good. Most of the people have clothes to wear, food to eat, and can live and work in peace and contentment. In such an environment, it is obviously impossible to have any great construction skills." Guaning, who was at the side, kept nodding. He agreed with his teacher's analysis. Kuang Yi didn't seem to have finished and continued. "This old man admires the Duke of Loyalty and courage, but I also fear him. This is because young people are sometimes impulsive and do not act according to common sense. I am worried that he will have other thoughts because he has the power weapon. That is why I advised the emperor to use him while also being on guard against him." Yes, we must be on guard against such people." Guaning agreed. After all, it was not the first time that one's merits overshadowed his master's. History has proven that once an official's merits were too great, there would be many rebellions. That is why I am so happy to hear this news. Just as you said, although the mercenary army is powerful, there are too few of them and their foundation is too weak. It is not possible for them to do anything to Jiaoji. The best outcome would be for both sides to suffer great losses. In that case, they would also suffer great losses. Without using a single soldier, the imperial court was able to make the two people whom they were wary of fight to the point where it was difficult to tell who would win. Moreover, they were both in a state of serious injury. Was this not good? Isn't this worthy of a celebration? Kuang Yi finally spoke clearly. When Guaning heard this, he could not help but nod. Teacher's analysis is very correct. The student will learn. Chapter 497. Ha ha ha. Guaning, you are actually very smart. Do your job well. Teacher is getting old and will retire one day. When that time comes, the Ministry of War will be under your control. Kuang Yi was so happy that he couldn't help but say what was on his mind. Guaning, who was still listening to his teacher's teachings, became excited when he heard this. This was the first time his teacher talked to him about his future. In the past, he thought that Kuang Yi only cared about serving the country and didn't think about personal matters. Now, it seemed that it wasn't that he didn't think about it, but that he didn't want to express it. Kuang Yi was almost 70 years old. How many more years would he be in charge of the Ministry of War? When he retires, he would arrange for his trusted aides to take over. This was human nature. At that time, it would be time for him to rise to the next level. Thank you, teacher. Guaning stood up and bowed in gratitude. Ha ha ha. Kuang Ye's laughter sounded again. It seemed that from this moment onwards, the southern Ming Empire had regained its former prosperity and power. The news was still being passed around and had not reached Nanjing yet. However, when the news reached there, especially after the emissary of Jiaoji met with Zhu Qizhen, it would definitely make Emperor Ingzong, who had not been doing well recently, happy. However, these people didn't know that their happiness was for nothing. Everything that was impossible in their eyes was possible in Yang Qindong's hands. They had underestimated the Duke of Loyalty. Jiaoji Country, Beatty City. 9 days had passed since Hong Jin and Ruan Chunqing agreed on the agreement. In these 9 days, more than 20,000 Han people had arrived at Beatty City. Among them, there were hundreds of Jiaoji spies who were hiding among them. They were dressed like the Han people. In addition, they had lived together for many years, so it was easy to disguise themselves. According to Ruan Chunqing, there were at least 10,000 Han people rushing here. There were also many cities that were still mobilizing because they were too far away. All in all, Ruan Chunqing was very proactive in this matter. His actions seemed to be very fast. However, Jiaoji wasn't a small country. It was impossible to complete this matter in 10 days. This way, it would be able to stall for time. Yang Qindong had long seen through Ruan Chunqing's thoughts. He didn't point it out because he also needed time to prepare for the battle. With the Han people entering the city, it would be easier for them to conceal their military objectives. As for whether or not there were spies from the Jiaoji nation among the 20,000 Han people who had already entered the city, Yang Qindong did not care. After all, these people were going to be sent to Ryukyu Island. At that time, no matter who you are, after studying and living there, you will become a resident of Crimson City. On the surface, Yu Qian was in charge of the management of Crimson City. However, he was more in charge of managing the people's livelihood and the development of various factories. In fact, he was still implementing military control among the people. If one had to describe it, it was a bit like when China was established in the 60s. Every outsider who entered would be strictly checked. Even if you were a Han person, you would be disrupted after entering the city. Yang Qindong was playing this game. Under such a policy, Leng Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, the militia, and even the children's regiment, as well as the residence committee, if anyone tried to do anything, they would be caught and dealt with. Even wearing a big hat on the streets was a common thing. It wasn't worth making a fuss about. Under such an atmosphere, no matter where these 20,000 Han people came from, they would only be on the same side when they arrived at Ryukyu Island. In fact, the moment these 20,000 people entered Beatty City, they were under military control. Then, they were escorted out of the city by Leng Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, and the temporary auxiliary soldiers to Chui City. At the seaside not far from Chui City, the Yangtze Navy's ship was already waiting there. On the ship, not only were there large amounts of firearms and ammunition produced by Crimson City's arsenal, there were also 50,000 Han people. These 50,000 Han Chinese were all young and active members who had performed outstandingly on Ryukyu Island. They were selected by various units and departments. They would become the backbone of the Jiaoji country in the future. They would lead the people here to build a new Crimson City. Of course, this so-called building was not really building a modern city. Instead, it was a transfer of management and governance. In other words, it was the continuation of Yangtze's new territory. This was also an expansion from the island to the mainland. This was the first expansion, and there was no prior experience. In order to achieve a better goal, these 50,000 people were only the first batch. There would be a second and third batch, each with 50,000 people. With these 150,000 people as the foundation, and some Leng Feng soldiers stationed here in the future, stabilizing the territory of Jiaoji would not be a problem. In truth, Yang Chendong wanted to send more people out from the island. However, these 150,000 youths were already enough to cause Crimson City to suffer. After all, what Ryukyu Island lacked the most was manpower. Being able to squeeze out these 150,000 people was because Yang Chendong had given a strict order, and his subordinates had no choice but to obey. If it had been someone else who had given this order, Yu Qian and the others would have been able to provide 20,000 to 30,000 people. Now, out of the first batch of 50,000 people, other than leaving behind 2,000 people in Chui City as the backbone to start changing the living conditions there, the remaining 48,000 people were carrying all kinds of food, drinks, and ammunition towards Beidai City. There are still too few people. A long sigh sounded out. This naturally belonged to Yang Chendong. It had been 4 years since he had come to this world. He had been working hard to reach this scale. In the eyes of others, this might be considered very impressive. However, compared to the grand goal in his heart, it was still too far away. If he had 100 million people, even if it was only 20 million people, he would dare to go to Japan and completely occupy it. He would even dare to go to the southwest and southeast of the Great Ming Dynasty. Unfortunately, there were less than 1 million people in Crimson City. Most of them were from conquering the First Shang Dynasty. Otherwise, the 150,000 people in front of him would be enough to make him worry. With a sigh, he thought that he still needed to encourage the people of Crimson City to have more children. Although he had done a series of encouraging measures before, many factories and land needed manpower. Some of the local women had no choice but to participate in farming. However, now that the people of Jiaoji were continuously sent to Ryukyu Island, those women could be idle. With them around, as long as the incentives were right, there was no need to worry about a large increase in the population. Turning his thoughts back, Yang Chendong raised his head and asked Tiger's Mane, "Is Nietong's 2nd Regiment in place?" "Young master, the day before yesterday, Commander Nye took the 2nd Regiment's Leng Feng and 10 battalions of naval auxiliary soldiers and headed towards Zhejiang Prefecture's coastline. If I'm not mistaken, they should be preparing to take action." Yang Chendong nodded thoughtfully. "Tell Regiment Commander Nye that after conquering Zhejiang County, don't rush to join us. Continue to send troops out of Sunan County and take it down first. If we need help here, let him know." In other words, there was no need for any reinforcements. With just these 10,000 soldiers, they would be able to take down Jiaoji County. Hearing this, Tiger's Mane nodded. "Yes, young master. I will inform Regiment Commander Nye of your orders. But can we really take down Jiaoji County with just us? Whether it is the military strength or the territory, it is far greater than Zhejiang County and Sunan County combined." Only Tiger's Mane, who had been by Yang Chendong's side for the longest time, dared to ask such a question. If it was someone else, they would only need to carry out the order. But his considerations were also very reasonable. Conquering a country was one thing, conquering it was another. If they didn't have enough military strength, they wouldn't be able to do it. Haha. Yang Chendong first smiled, but he didn't immediately answer this question. Instead, he casually pointed outside the door. Following the direction of his finger, Tiger's Mane saw Hong Jin standing respectfully outside, waiting for Yang Chendong to summon him. "Isn't there General Hong Jin?" After casually saying this, Tiger's Mane suddenly thought of something and said in surprise, "Young master means to use him as a general," and then, "That's right." Yang Chendong directly interrupted Tiger's Mane's words and said with a smile, "That's right. There is a saying, to control the barbarians with the barbarians. We can form a Jiaoji mercenary army and let them be in charge of the security of Jiaoji County. Compared to us, they are more familiar with this place, right?" Yang Chendong was currently thinking about the Japanese army in the future. He had to admit that the Japanese army that invaded China didn't have enough military strength, so he came up with this idea. And it was because of this that he almost completed the act of a snake swallowing an elephant. Since others can use it, he can naturally use it too. In addition, he can also send some troublemakers to Resin City. In this way, without those troublemakers, Hong Jin's pressure will be reduced a lot. After Tiger's Mane understood Yang Chendong's intention, he looked at the young master with admiration. He really didn't know how the young master's brain worked. How could he come up with so many good ideas? Just like using the Jiaoji mercenary army to govern the Jiaoji people, he wouldn't have thought of this even if he was beaten to death. It wasn't that Tiger's Mane was stupid. It was just that no one had used this method before, so naturally he wouldn't have thought of it. Chapter 498. "Well, go and wake Hong Jin up," Yang Chendong said casually, then turned around and sat back on the big chair. In front of Tiger's Mane, he could do anything he wanted, but in front of a surrendered general like Hong Jin, he had to maintain his dignity. What was a superior? Not only did he have an imposing manner, but he also had to learn all kinds of methods and use all kinds of environments to enhance his imposing manner. Once he did it well, it would give his subordinates a lot of psychological pressure. When he issued an order, there would naturally be no second opinion. Not long after Yang Chendong sat down, Hong Jin came in under Tiger's Mane's lead. As soon as he entered the room, Hong Jin knelt on the ground, not daring to raise his head, and said in a very respectful voice, "Subordinate Hong Jin greets Duke of Loyalty." As a surrendered general, Hong Jin was very clear about his identity. Not only in front of Yang Chendong, but even in front of some ordinary mercenary officers, he was very respectful. Therefore, for a long time, no one really made things difficult for him. Originally, under the leadership and teaching of Yang Chendong, the mercenaries were very particular about the equality between officers and soldiers. Even if a soldier joined the army, as long as he was not too arrogant, no one would make trouble for him. If Hong Jin's attitude was slightly better, it would be even worse to say that no one would want to make things difficult for him. Yes. Seeing Hong Jin kneeling in front of him so respectfully, Yang Chendong nodded and then said casually, "You did a good job." Hearing the praise, Hong Jin, who was kneeling there, felt happy. However, he still said cautiously, "It's all thanks to the Duke of Loyalty's good teachings. All right, there's no need to call me Duke of Loyalty. You're my man, so just call me Sixth Young Master from now on." Yang Chendong slowly straightened his body as he spoke. The change in address meant that he had been initially accepted by Yang Chendong. Hong Jin, who was overjoyed, quickly kowtowed to the ground and said, "Yes, Sixth Young Master." Yang Chendong could understand the slight tremor in Hong Jin's voice. After all, even though the Hong family had some power, it was still far from the Yuan, Chun, Li, Fan, Huang, and Pan families. It could be said that at this moment, Hong Jin really wanted to be understood and recognized. Yang Chendong, who fully understood this, wanted to give Hong Jin a chance to stand out. "Hong Jin, have you ever thought of putting down the things you're doing and doing something else?" The work at hand was to settle the Han people who came from all parts of Jiaoji. Even though this job didn't seem like much, most of the Han Chinese who came here were in a daze. Many of them didn't even know why they were here. They were all forced to come here by the Jiaoji army. These people didn't have any feelings of gratitude or excitement. Even so, Hong Jin was happy to do these things. In his opinion, some things wouldn't have much effect if he didn't do them at the beginning, but as time passed, as long as he treated these Han people well, they would eventually remember him. Who knew when one or two of these people would stand out? At that time, if they were willing to take care of him, that would be the greatest reward. It was precisely because he had such an idea in his heart that when he suddenly heard Yang Chendong say that he was not allowed to take care of this matter, panic appeared on his face. He didn't know if he did something wrong, or if he did something that Yang Chendong wasn't satisfied with. Therefore, his first reaction was to kowtow to the ground again. Then, he continued to explain, "Sixth young master, this lowly one does things in a rough manner. If there is anything that is not to your liking, please forgive this lowly one. This lowly one knows his mistakes and will definitely correct them." Mistake? What mistake did you make? Even with Yang Qindong's intelligence, he didn't know what to do with Hong Jin's actions. Hearing that there was no blame in Yang Qindong's words, Hong Jin slowly raised his head with a puzzled look. Just as Hong Jin raised his head, Yang Qindong's voice sounded. "This young master wants to give you a chance to stand out, a chance to bring glory to your Hong clan. How about this? You form an army and you will be the general. The number of people should be around 30,000. Other than the advanced firearms, this young master will provide you with any other weapons. How about it?" Before Yang Chendong could finish his words, there was a heavy thud on the ground. Looking carefully, it was the sound of Hong Jin kneeling and kowtowing. It was just a few kowtows, and there was already blood flowing out from his forehead. "Sixth young master, thank you, thank you. I won't say anything else. I will remember your kindness. In the future, if you tell me to go east, I will definitely not go west. The Hong clan will also follow the sixth young master's lead for the rest of my life." It was no wonder that Hong Jin was so emotional. He had worked very hard since he was young, and that was why he had the chance to become Ruan Gengwang's deputy general and lead an army alone. Although he failed in the end when he faced the mercenary army. Didn't he do all this for the sake of bringing glory to the Hong clan? Now, the usually strong Jiaoji army was so weak in the face of the mercenary army. If things went wrong, Jiaoji would be in big trouble. It was hard to say if the Hong clan would be able to survive. And it was at this time that Yang Chendong allowed him to form his own army. Such a huge contrast was equivalent to a person who was so poor that he couldn't afford to eat suddenly finding a 10 million check in his bowl while begging for food. How could he not be excited and filled with gratitude? Hong Jin knelt there with tears of gratitude on his face. Then he kept swearing. Yang Chendong saw all this, but he wasn't moved. He didn't really want to pity anyone, because when he thought about how the Han clan would have to be slaves for a few hundred years if it wasn't for his appearance, he was furious. Back then, did anyone pity the Han clan? Of course, the answer was no. In this world, it was sad to rely on other people's pity to survive. The most important thing was to have your own strength. As long as he had enough strength, he would be able to gain the recognition and respect of others. Everything else was just fleeting clouds. As for what Hong Jin said, it might be true now. But when he really obtained a high position, when the mercenary army's strength couldn't affect him, who knew what he would do? Instead of placing his hopes on others, it was better to set strict rules from the start. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about other people causing trouble. All right, stop kowtowing. Your body is your own. This young master still needs you. If you get injured because of this and can't lead the army, then I'll have to consider changing you. As Yang Chendong said this, Hong Jin knelt there obediently. Obviously, he was really afraid that Yang Chendong would change him. If that was the case, all his hard work and performance would go down the drain. Seeing that Hong Jin's breathing had stabilized, he wasn't as agitated as before. Yang Chendong's voice sounded again. This young master can allow you to lead an army, but you have to agree to 3 conditions in advance. If you can do it, then this job is yours. If you can't do it, then there's no need to force yourself. This young master won't punish you for this. But if you can't do it, then you won't even have a chance to be free. Do you understand? Understood. This little one understands. Sixth young master, just tell me what to do. At this moment, Hong Jin didn't have the ability to bargain. He had already thought it through. No matter how harsh Yang Qindong's conditions were, he would agree to all of them. No matter how high the requirements were, it was better than not knowing what would happen tomorrow. Seeing that Hong Jin agreed so quickly, Yang Qindong didn't doubt his sincerity. After all, if he was in Hong Jin's shoes, he wouldn't be able to reject the opportunity to lead an army either. Then listen carefully. First, 30,000 soldiers is a limit. No matter what happens in the future, unless there's an order for you, the number of soldiers can't exceed this number. If you're found out, you'll be stripped of your position and investigated. Second, these 30,000 soldiers must listen to the arrangements of the mercenary army unconditionally. If you or any of your subordinates dare to have any selfish thoughts, you'll be killed without mercy. Even you won't be able to escape the crime of not managing your army properly. Third, those who are capable in the Hong family can join the army. Those who aren't can't be forced to join. As for the other Hong family members who aren't young, or the elderly, children, and women, this young master will arrange for them to live in another place. I guarantee that they'll have a good life and won't be in any danger. However, they can't live in Jiaoji anymore. It's up to you to decide how to do this job. These are the 3 conditions. If you agree to them, this young master will also promise you what I just said. If you don't, then just pretend that I didn't say anything. Yang Qindong stated the 3 conditions and waited for Hong Jin's reply. He didn't have any intention of forcing Hong Jin. There were some things that couldn't be done well without the initiative. As for why he wanted to form a Jiaoji mercenary army, it was because the number of mercenaries he had was still too little. If he had to leave behind a sizable army for every territory he conquered, then no amount of mercenaries would be enough. After Yang Qindong finished speaking, Hong Jin, who was kneeling on the ground, heard everything clearly and quickly came to a decision. Sixth young master, Hong Jin is willing. Hong Jin naturally understood the meaning behind Yang Qindong's words. He wouldn't be allowed to grow, let alone form his own faction. At the end of the day, he would only be a puppet. Even so, he was still a general of 30,000 soldiers. As long as he didn't go overboard, there shouldn't be any problems. Compared to those Jiaoji generals who wanted to go against the mercenary army, those people were destined to die. Hong Jin was already very fortunate to have what he had. Why would he be unwilling? Chapter 499. What's more, Yang Qindong had also said that as long as the Hong family members were capable, they could also be brought into the army. As long as the descendants of the Hong family worked hard and were nurtured well, this 30,000-strong army would be equivalent to the Hong family's own army. Other than a powerful mercenary group, no one else would be able to suppress him. This could also be considered as bringing glory to the Hong family. Hong Jin agreed. This was within Yang Qindong's expectations. All right, since that's the case, Tiger's Mane will tell you what to do. From now on, you can put down whatever you're doing. Tomorrow was the 10th day. Yang Qindong had already made his preparations and was about to launch a fierce offensive. Naturally, he would have to put aside the matter of accepting the Hans for now. However, Hong Jin did not know about this. He thought that someone else would take over his job. Now that he was focused on becoming a general, he kowtowed and expressed his gratitude before leaving with Tiger's Mane. After exiting the room, Tiger's Mane walked out while speaking to Hong Jin, who had his head lowered and was one step behind him. You're quite lucky. The young master chose you because of your recent good performance. However, I hope that you can continue to work hard and don't think of other things. Yes, Tiger's Mane is right. Hong Jin will remember. Since the young master has allowed you to become a general, you can go and pick soldiers now. There are 20,000 Jiaoji citizens in Beidai City. Among them, there are around 6,000 youths. You can choose 2,000 of them to follow the mercenary army to the battlefield tomorrow. Of course, you won't be doing anything dangerous. You'll just have to clean up the battlefield, watch over the prisoners, and collect military supplies. Tiger's mane spoke softly, but these words were like a bolt from the blue in Hong Jin's ears. His mind went blank. Tomorrow, tomorrow? Yes. Tiger's mane nodded. Since he had decided to use Hong Jin, there were some things that he was not afraid of in advance. The young master and Jiaoji have been feigning civility for 9 days. All the preparations have been completed. Naturally, it's time to turn hostile. Hong Jin could no longer hear Tiger's mane's next words. His mind was still muddled. He had always thought that the mercenaries couldn't take down the entire Jiaoji, and he didn't want to continue fighting. That was why he decided to negotiate with them. As for his position as a general, it should only be to protect Chuyi and Beidai cities. But now, he realized that he couldn't see through Yang Chendong at all. Naturally, he couldn't know what Yang Chendong was really thinking. Could it be that Jiaoji is really going to be destroyed? As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, Hong Jin became excited. If he only wanted to govern Chuyi and the northern belt before, wouldn't he be able to govern the entire Jiaoji region? If that was the case, he would have a lot of power. The excitement only lasted for a moment before Hong Jin thought of another terrifying result. His Hong family was still in Juzhen Prefecture. Because both sides were negotiating, the Jiaoji army naturally wouldn't do anything to the Hong family. But once the war started, how could he guarantee his family's safety? Tiger's mane, my Hong family? Whom Meng already knew what Hong Jin wanted to say, so he directly interrupted him and said, "Your Hong family doesn't need to worry. At this moment, the Juzhen County should have already been captured by the mercenary navy. Your Hong family will be safe." Juzhen Prefecture. It faced the sea from east to west, connected to Jiaoji Prefecture in the north, and connected to Rinan Prefecture in the south. It was an important transportation link in Jiaoji. Previously, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong stayed here to stabilize the situation in Jiaoji. But because Hanoi City was in danger, the old King Lily didn't care. The Crown Prince had no choice but to leave for the capital to find a solution. After the Crown Prince left, the normally tense Jiaoji officials were relieved that there was no longer a curse on their heads. Although the mercenaries had appeared in Chuyi City and Beidai City, they were still some distance away from them. Not to mention, they had already received orders to send all the Han people out to negotiate with the mercenaries. Since it was a peace negotiation, there was no need to worry about the safety here. Coincidentally, it was drizzling today, so the generals and soldiers guarding the coastline went into their rooms to slack off. May Island. It was near Wuxia City, the source of the eastern coastline of Jiaoji. Usually, there were hundreds of Jiaoji soldiers stationed here. Once they discovered any enemy, they would immediately light the beacon on the island to provide information to the city less than 100 miles away. It was drizzling today. It had been raining since morning, and there was even a moderate drizzle in the afternoon. Under such terrible weather, the visibility on the sea was not high. The Jiaoji soldiers in charge of the lookout could only see about 20 meters ahead of them. Beyond that, all they could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. With their vision obstructed and the fact that there had been no enemy here for many years, the soldiers let down their guard. Under the drizzle, other than the 2 lookout posts on the north and south, the rest of the soldiers had gone to rest in the barracks. In this environment where not even a single bird could be seen, a small boat slowly approached Miao Island. When it was about 100 meters away from the island, it suddenly stopped. Rain and fog were everywhere, forming a very good protection, making it difficult for people to spot it. As soon as the boat came to a stop, 8 men in black tights appeared on the boat and disappeared in a flash. After a few soft splashes, the 8 men dived into the water and headed straight for Miao Island, which was 100 meters away. Just like the Wolf Fong special forces on land, they were like a sharp knife that could be stabbed into the enemy's chest at any time. In the Navy, Division Commander Gao Xiong had invested a lot of energy and resources to form an elite team that struck fear in the hearts of the enemy. They were the Marine Corps. Since its establishment, the Marine Corps had completed no less than 20 missions. Many ships traveling in this sea area wanted to quietly pass by without paying the protection fee, but in the end, the ships sank to the bottom of the sea, which was partly due to their efforts. This time, in order to complete the mission taught by the sixth young master, Commander Nyetong had transferred a platoon of Marine Corps from Division Commander Gao Xiong. The 8 men just now were just the first batch of soldiers to enter the sea. With the first batch, there would naturally be a second batch. In the blink of an eye, another 8 men had disappeared into the sea. After a few more batches, a platoon of 30 soldiers had entered the sea. About half an hour after these people entered the sea, many large warships appeared behind the small boat. It was as if they had descended from the sky. They first appeared in the white fog, then slowly approached Miao Island. The soldiers on May Island were completely unaware of this. They did not know that their fate had already been decided at this moment. They also did not know that at the edge of the island, 30 mercenaries armed with Type 95 mercenaries had already landed on the shore and were slowly approaching them. They had already practiced infiltration and landing on the island countless times. It was just a group of 100 unprepared enemies. These elite soldiers did not even consider them a threat. If not for the fact that they were afraid of alerting the enemy and causing them to ignite the fire beacon, which would hinder their next attack on the beach, they would not have needed to infiltrate like this and would have directly attacked. Even though they were very confident in their own combat strength, when they reached the island from the sea, the 30 elite soldiers did not immediately make their move. Instead, they carefully observed the terrain. Discovering that it was the same as what they had predicted, other than the 2 Jiaoji soldiers on the lookout posts, there were no other enemies. As the platoon leader of the Marine Corps, Feng Liao Ran raised his right hand and made a gesture. Following that, the 10 soldiers advanced forward like foxes. This squad of soldiers was not only responsible for dealing with the enemies on the lookout posts, they were also responsible for protecting the beacon towers that could be ignited at any time. As for Feng Liao Ran, he led the remaining 2 squads of soldiers towards the only military camp on the island, which was a row of stone bungalows. Without any warning, the silencer on the 95 gun fired a bullet. The 2 Jiaoji soldiers who were still dozing off saw the King of Hell. Following the elimination of the outer sentries, Feng Liao Ran and the rest began to increase their speed. However, their worries were unfounded. Even when they rushed to the entrance of the bungalow, they were still not discovered, and not a single person walked out of the bungalow. Prepare the smoke grenades. Feng Liao Ran raised his right hand and ordered while holding his gun. Ever since the smoke grenades were taken out by Yang Qindong from the warehouse, they had been the research object of the Crimson City's arsenal. Finally, they had successfully replicated it a while ago. However, because too many things were involved, they were still unable to mass-produce them. However, an elite force like the Marine Corps was naturally equipped with them. Break the door and throw the grenades. With a very straightforward battle order, a Marine raised his right leg and fiercely kicked towards the camp gate. Clang! The moment the door was opened, 2 smoke grenades were successfully thrown in. Then the door was closed. 2 platoons of Marines stared at the door. 21 muzzles were aimed at it to prevent any accidents from happening. Cough, cough, cough. In less than 2 breaths of time, loud coughing sounds echoed throughout the camp. Then, the camp door was pushed open, and the Jiaoji soldiers who were choking with tears in their eyes ran out. The first Jiaoji soldier who ran out did not even have time to see what was going on outside when he felt his body become light and was sent flying. Before he could regain his composure and see what was going on around him, a cold muzzle was pointed at his head. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.